hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching. Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. I campaigned in the largest democratic vote in our island story. I know this country has so much to be proud of. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better. The wisdom of the nation is in its people. Vox Populi, Vox Dei. That's why I'm joining the People's Channel. Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good morning, it's 9:30 on Tuesday, the 14th of March. Welcome to The Point with me, Andrew Pearce, and Bev Turner.
Good morning. Now, crisis at the BBC. This story is not going away. Lineker returns, shrouded in controversy, and today producers are accused of hanging Fiona Bruce out to dry. With 1,000 people a week being criminalised for not paying the licence fee, is it time to defund the state broadcaster?
I think it might be. Now, splashing out, gripped by an energy and cost of living crisis, but the Prime Minister has found some spare cash to pay to upgrade the electricity grid to heat his, private swimming pool. Is he out of touch? We're going to be asking the former leader of the Lib Dems.
Also, heading down a dangerous road. China's stark warning to Britain as the UK announces a pact to build nuclear submarines with the US and Australia.
And Home Secretary Braverman blasts the migrant bill, critics accusing them of being out-of-touch lefties, of trying to derail her asylum plan. So are the government's proposals to get a grip of migration on track?
So we have a huge amount to get through. Let us know your thoughts this morning on all of our stories. GBViews at gbnews.uk is the email address. I really do want to understand the implications of this defence story.
Yeah. Well,
it sounds like it could be extremely serious.
Significant, and it's all about sticking up to China, doing a deal with Australia, in Asia, and also nicking that deal for submarines from France. Let's not forget that.
Yeah, while we're talking about that, we're not talking about the swimming pool. We're going to talk about the swimming pool and what a big deal that is with Rishi Sunak. Does it mean that he's completely out of touch with the voters? All of that's come, but first of all, your news with Tamsin Roberts.
Bev, thank you. Good morning from the GB newsroom. It's 9:32. The Chancellor is looking at increasing the lifetime pension allowance in an attempt to reverse the trend of early retirements. It's understood Jeremy Hunt is considering allowing individuals to put more money into their pension pot before being taxed. The current lifetime allowance stands at just over £1 million, with savers incurring tax after that personal pension pot threshold has been exceeded. The measures are expected to be unveiled at tomorrow's budget as the Chancellor looks to increase Britain's workforce to help stimulate the economy. The Prime Minister and US President have discussed increased assertiveness from China with an agreed approach to engage and maintain talks with the country. Rishi Sunak and Joe Biden met in San Diego alongside the Australian Prime Minister to announce a new submarine programme between the three countries. Mr Sunak outlined security steps in the UK, with the leaders discussing the importance of working together for global stability. Security Minister Tom Tugendhat told GB News it requires a multi-agency government effort to tackle the threat from China.
The AUKUS element, the defence element that the Prime Minister was in San Diego signing, is only one aspect of it, and there's much more about this to come. So this is a whole-of-government approach. It involves education, it involves the police, it involves so many different aspects of our intelligence services that this is a huge, I'm afraid, challenge. It's true, because there are some areas where we've got to engage. We've got to engage with our eyes wide open, and this is something I've always said. We mustn't be naive. There were certainly some people who may have been in recent decades.
The UK unemployment has remained unchanged at 3.7% in the 3 months to January, according to official data. Figures from the Office for National Statistics also show vacancies have fallen for the 8th month in a row as firms hold off from recruiting due to uncertainty and economic pressures. Real pay continues to fall despite a drop in the inflation rate. TV, online and DAB plus radio, this is GB News. More from me shortly. Now, though, it's back to Bev and Andrew.
Very good morning. Thank you for joining Bev and Andrew on To The Point on GB News this morning on TV and, of course, on your DAB radio. Now, as we look ahead to tomorrow's budget, one of the thorniest fights the Prime Minister and the Chancellor are set to face is with their own backbenches, and it's all over corporation tax.
But first, that Stop the Boats bill, well, it passed its first hurdle in the Commons last night.
Home Secretary Suella Braverman claimed that the public is realistic and knows the UK can't help unlimited amounts of people.
I will not be hectored by out-of-touch lefties, or anyone for that matter. I won't be patronised. I won't be patronised on what appropriate views for someone of my background can hold. And I will not back down when faced with spurious accusations of bigotry.
The usual tough talk from the Home Secretary. Some MPs, of course, didn't support the government's plans, including the former Prime Minister, Theresa May. Remember her? She claimed that modern slavery victims she brought in that modern slavery bill would become collateral damage.
So the former Lib Dem leader, Sir Vince Cable, joins me now. Good morning, Sir Vince. Are you with Theresa May on this, that modern slavery victims will become collateral damage of this policy?
Yes, I am, and I think she made some very good points. I mean, let's be very clear. I mean, Theresa May was a very tough Home Secretary for 5 years. I actually disagreed with her strongly on some of her anti-immigration measures, particularly things like trying to keep out overseas students. But the point she was making yesterday, that the legislation is likely not to be effective, as well as causing, quite serious human rights problems. I mean, her points were very well made, and she speaks from experience.
She also, of course, Sir Vince, as you well know, was the Home Secretary that created the hostile environment for migrants, which she continues to get a lot of flack for.
She didn't create it. I mean, it was there. She probably aggravated it. Yeah. But as long as I was an MP, 20 years, it was becoming increasingly difficult, starting with, David Blunkett in that era, having more and more constituency cases of people who are running into problems with the Home Office. So the so-called hostile environment's been there for a long time, and the Windrush problem was indeed very much on her watch. But there is a much bigger issue here that's gone on for a longer period of time.
So the Stop the Boats policy will be popular in the country, Sir Vince. Do you think it can work practically?
I'm not sure it would necessarily be popular. There is a segment of the electorate that is very concerned about immigration in particular, and the so-called small boats problem in particular. There's no evidence that the public at large are deeply alarmed about the problem, and the evidence seems to suggest that anti-immigrant sentiment is strongest in areas where the population of immigrants is lowest. There is a very particular problem about asylum, as we now know. There have been repeated attempts to deal with it, and none of them have been effective. And I don't think this will be effective. I mean, there are things we have to do. We have to have a good collaborative relationship with the French over returns, over the issue of policing to stop smuggling. We need some safe routes for countries where there is clearly a chronic human rights issue. Afghanistan as opposed to Albania, they're very different cases. A lot needs to be done. It's a very difficult problem, and Britain isn't the only problem struggling with this. A lot of people are dying crossing the Mediterranean. It isn't just a British problem.
What would the Liberal Democrats do, Vince? What will the policy be running up to the election for the Lib Dems?
Our policy is to acknowledge that, of course, you have to have secure borders. Everybody accepts that. But that we do need a humane and reasonable approach to people seeking asylum. We've done so for creating safe routes for people from the Ukraine, absolutely rightly, also from Hong Kong, and for a very limited number of Afghans. And where people are fleeing countries where there is a genuine risk of persecution, I mean, Iraq, Syria, Afghanistan, we need to have a legal route so that people from those countries are not forced into these illegal channel crossings. But where you have illegal immigration for economic reasons, say people coming from Albania, then of course we must stop and deport people who are coming illegally, and that has to be firm and very clear.
Last year, Sir Vince, 45,000 people came to Britain across the Channel. Suggestions it will be far higher this year. Those numbers are surely unsustainable with the impact on social cohesion, housing, hospitals, schools.
Well, the figure of 45,000 has to be put in the context of net immigration of about 300,000. And if you're worried about the impact on social services, that's the calculation that we have to make. Personally, I think net immigration has been generally beneficial from the UK, but there are pressure points. You're quite right, and we have to safeguard those. But the 45,000 asylum seekers is little over 10% of total net immigration. It's a difficult problem, but it's not a massive problem in terms of numbers.
What do you make of the language the Home Secretary uses, Sir Vince? Is it inflammatory?
It is somewhat, yeah. I think likening it to Nazi Germany almost certainly isn't a good analogy, but it is inflammatory. And those of us who've been around a long time will remember that there's a long tradition of this. Enoch Powell and his rivers of blood, and there have been episodes of this ever since, which is why I, disagree probably with you about Gary Lineker. He may not have chosen his words very well, but it was perfectly reasonable to use his Twitter feed to make some comment about it.
Now, you're in the lovely town of Twickenham there on the river. Rishi Sunak is fortunate to live also by the river in Yorkshire, but apparently he needs somewhere else to swim, Vince, and his swimming pool has required an upgrading of the local electricity supply so that he can keep it warm enough. What is your take on that when people can't at the moment afford to pay their own electricity bills?
Well, I think people in high political position have to set an example. I mean, when I was a cabinet minister, we had our pay frozen. We travelled second class wherever possible. You're trying to set an example in difficult conditions, and leadership has got to come from the top. It's not a good example.
Sir Vince, he should follow the example of Mrs Thatcher, who refused to heat the swimming pool at Chequers because she said that it wasn't fair on the public purse.
Those days are gone.
Well, yeah, I mean, Mrs Thatcher had her strong points, and one of them was that she put austerity into practice in her own life, as far as we can judge. So, yeah, I think that's a good role model.
OK. Thank you so much, Sir Vince Cable there. Thank you for your time this morning. It's interesting, isn't it? I think the public are going to be outraged about this swimming pool.
I think, why did he put it in? He put it in last summer. It was mad. Just delay it. I mean, it looks like cost of living crisis. He just discovered his wife's a billionaire. His wife was a non-dom. It does not look good.
And it's only his weekend home. That's remember that.
And he's got a home in London. There's 2 homes in London, and he's got one in the United States. Look, we shouldn't be against rich men and women entering Parliament, but as Sir Vince says, it's all about perception.
Absolutely. It makes a mockery of the green agenda.
Yeah.
You lot can't drive your cars because of the fumes, but I'm going to upgrade the electricity in the area so I can heat my swimming pool. Anyway, let me know what you think about that. gbviews@gbnews.uk. As we look ahead to tomorrow's budget, one of the thorniest fights the Prime Minister and Chancellor are set to face is with their own backbenchers.
Now, Tom, the planned corporation tax hike from 19 to 25%, that has caused a huge backlash on the backbenches. I haven't met a Tory MP who thinks it should go ahead, and we shouldn't forget that Jeremy Hunt, the Chancellor, in his leadership campaign last summer, when he got a mere 20 votes, supported cutting the corporation tax from 19 to 15%. He's now going to whack it up by 6%. It'll be double the rate in Ireland.
It certainly will be, and Jeremy Hunt has got a history of saying that we should have a lower corporation tax. He said it, of course, last summer when he stood for the leadership. Indeed, in the previous time he stood for the leadership, back in 2019, he wanted to cut it down to 12.5%.
I forgot what a serial loser he is. I'd forgotten that.
Yeah, no, he was the final. He was the competition to Boris Johnson in the final 2 round at that point.
That's right, of course he was.
But it is interesting because there is significant pressure from Conservative backbench MPs on this issue. As you rightly say, many of them are very exercised by this point, just as we're heading into choppy economic waters. Making things harder for British businesses seems like a very curious thing to do. However, I've been picking up that there is something that the Treasury is looking to do to perhaps in some way mitigate that rise. And this is about investment allowances. Currently, there's something called the super deduction, which was a time-limited policy introduced by Rishi Sunak as Chancellor, which allows companies to offset their corporation tax against capital investment. If they buy a new machine, they can take the cost of that off their tax bill. Now, that comes to an end in April. What may well happen is that comes forward at a rate of 100%. At the moment, the super deduction is 130%. They can claim slightly over the cost of what they've invested. It looks like that companies in this country will be able to claim 100% of investment, particularly in capital investment, so factories and those sorts of things in this country. They might well have an easier time of this corporation tax rise because they'll be able to offset.
I get that, but that's still not going to say to AstraZeneca, who we thought were going to set up a nice fabulous £300 million factory in Cheshire, it's not going to stop them going to Ireland, is it?
Well, with AstraZeneca, it might. And this is because AstraZeneca has a lot of production facilities as well as research. So if they want to build a big new plant, that could be the kind of investment that actually reduces their tax bill. And interestingly, the Chancellor, when he was speaking to Esther and Phil on GB News on Saturday, said that if he were to have his time again in the leadership race, he'd talk less about the headline rate of corporation tax and more about the effective rate, the amount that companies actually pay rather than what they're sort of nominally told they might be paying. And so I think that to some extent this will be a bit of a sop to mitigate some of that dissent, although no doubt we'll still hear a lot of less than happy Tory MPs.
And that's all very good if you're going to build a new factory with a huge amount of plant and production capability. But if you are a restaurant owner, a shop owner, If you have anything that provides a service to people, it does absolutely nothing to keep you in business, Tom.
No.
Is there going to be much on the table for those people?
There isn't, and this is the economic backdrop to this. The overwhelming message from the Chancellor tomorrow will be we're still in tough economic times, and that there will of course be a lot of businesses that are hit by this.
There's
of course,
normally
talking
a white
about
rabbit that comes out the hat. Is there not going to be one? A white rabbit out the hat? No big surprise?
I don't think we're going to get any big surprises, mainly because we've got so many leaks in the way. So we're talking this morning not just about the potential for this investment allowance, that could be the potential rabbit, but also about investment zones that the Treasury has been talking about just in the last day. Now, these investment zones are very different from the investment zones that Liz Truss proposed. Right. It's mainly about subsidising industry in these, I think, 8 or 10 investment zones that the Treasury is planning. Now, Liz Truss's investment zones, they wanted to slash tax, reform planning regulation, and really create new industry with private investment. The Jeremy Hunt investment zones that we've been told a little bit about ahead of this budget seem like they're doing precisely the opposite. It's about taxpayer money going into places and almost picking winners. So it's a very different style of government.
Sorry, Bev. The Prime Minister at big talks with Biden and the Australian Prime Minister, huge deal on these Australian submarines, which he pinched from under the nose of President Macron. We all cheer to that. But that's not just about big jobs for Britain. It's all about Britain, Australia, America standing up to China.
It certainly is, and what's really interesting here is about the class of submarine that is being designed based off British nuclear submarines, but with American tech. And these will be part constructed across the United Kingdom. We're going to see them come on stream for the Australians, based around Western Australia from the 2030s. But in the 2020s, Australia are getting some Virginia-class American submarines to sort of fill that gap. And of course, nuclear submarines are incredibly complicated tech. The United Kingdom is one of the few countries in the world that runs these submarines, along with the United States. And so Australian servicemen are going to start training with us and with the Americans to get used to the kit as well in the meantime. This is about really counterbalancing Chinese influence, particularly around the South China Sea, and that part of the world that's becoming so much more a theatre of geopolitics.
OK, thank you, Tom. Tom Harwood there. Right, let's get back to this illegal migration bill. It's cleared its second reading in the Commons by 312 votes to 250. The anti-racism campaigner Bushra Sheikh joins us in the studio now. Bushra, do you welcome this bill being voted in last night?
Absolutely not. Gosh, we've been talking about this for a long time, and I believe this is a conversation that's going to go on for a while. No. The public speaks volumes. This is an illegal migration bill. This isn't about who's coming into the country. This is cherry-picking.
Who said it's illegal?
You know, well, we are. I am.
No, you are.
I'm saying it
publicly.
publicly.
Have you got legal advice to say that? Because the government are talking to lawyers all the time.
Well, we have human rights. We have human rights
The government
here.
have got good lawyers who'll say whether it's legal or not.
Oh, I mean, I'm sure they've got in plenty of people to say the opposite, or, you know, everything that they say. I'm sure they can find someone to bias that.
They're called civil servant lawyers. That's what's their job is to advise the government.
Andrew, we have human rights, which basically means if an individual comes to this country, they have the right on process and application to deem whether it is OK for them to stay in this country. What we've done at the moment now is we're cherry-picking who those people are, who we're accepting to come into our country. And quite frankly, is that how we want to operate? I believe that the UK and Great Britain are compassionate people. We need to build this on integrity. These are individuals that are fleeing persecution. You know, they're not coming from a wonderful life. They have nothing, you know, so that's what they're looking for.
You would agree that something needs to be done to stop the people trafficking across the water?
Yes.
And so how do we therefore fulfil your aim of being a compassionate country which has a long-standing tradition of providing refuge for those whose lives are genuinely at risk, and stopping that? There's the tens of thousands of people, the record numbers who are coming across the sea.
Yeah, I mean, look, there are so many different aspects when we talk about migration. We have the trafficking. That trafficking isn't just coming from, let's say, France. We have a trafficking issue in our country. They are coming across into these boats and they are stopping on our land. So how do we tackle that? We need to find them at that point. Then we need to have safe pathways. I know that pre-Brexit, some of these pathways were stopped and access was not given to other countries. So we need to open those up again.
Safe passage, just sorry, Andrew, but safe passage to Rwanda and then be processed there, that would be safe, would it not?
I mean, potentially that's an idea that they could think about, but really what people are going to try and do is come to an economically growing country where the opportunities are. And if there is a processing system here in this country, then, like, you know, what we were thinking of is potentially sending them to Rwanda. But we still need to tackle what the issue is. There are not enough safe pathways and application processes in other countries connecting them to the UK.
But we are a compassionate country, you know that. Net migration to Britain last year was 300,000.
And how many of those did we say yes to?
And they came through safe routes. Why can't? And what these people also, don't forget, Busha, coming from France, it's a safe country, coming from Albania, there's no war or conflict. Increasing numbers now are coming from India, no war or conflict. They've got to be turned away.
Well, yes, look, again, this is the processing system, right? So if somebody's coming here, we need to deem that that this is right for them to stay here. However, you can classify this as a very discriminative policy because we have people coming from Ukraine, right? They are also refugees, but we are, again, cherry-picking the ones to come here. We have organisations in this country that are now going to incentivise people to house these refugees. They are just as much of a refugee as anybody else that comes from Albania, that flees a country
There's no war in Albania. There's no war in Albania.
If an individual...
There's a major conflict in Ukraine.
There are several reasons why people migrate, Andrew. It could be violence. It could be
Germany doesn't allow people
danger.
from Albania. They allow nobody coming from Albania. That's Germany and France. We should have exactly the same policy.
OK, so what we're saying here is if your reason is good enough, then we will accept you here.
I think there's a very different feeling. I think, for instance, if you are a resident of Afghanistan and you were working with the British government undercover for many years and suddenly the West left, we scarpered and we left a lot of people very vulnerable. I think the majority of people watching this would say, yes, we are compassionate, we understand, and there should be a safe route for people like that. But I do think that if it is Albanians or economic migrants, the majority of people coming over are young men. They do want, you somebody told when you said they need to be able to go to somewhere which is a strong economic country, an opportunity.
Of course.
Well, that's not a good enough reason to seek asylum if you want to come here.
That's just one reason. That's just one reason. And on the grounds of Afghanistan, we said that we would welcome them here. We had like 9,000 Afghanistan seek refuge, and we only housed 22 out of 9,000. Which is interesting because on one hand we're trying to welcome them and we're saying that we will provide this safe space, but yet out of 9,000 of them we only house 22.
Well,
do you think Gary Lineker was right then to stand up for effectively the migrants? He said he wants to give a voice to the voiceless.
I believe he's right to do that if that's his opinion. If that's how he feels and he feels strongly about a subject, people should have the opportunity to voice that publicly.
Will it make any difference though? Well, this is what I think, we've been talking about this. Is it only Tuesday? I was going to say all week. The story's been rumbling on, hasn't it, over the weekend as well. But will it actually make any difference to the mood of the nation, what Gary Lineker says about this topic?
I believe what it will do, it will definitely give people the confidence to say, if we feel very strongly about something, that we should voice it. And for me, I think it's important. I think it's important that we have the backing.
Do people have the confidence to say the opposite, though? Because this is one of the things I have concluded in the last 24 hours.
Yeah.
There are a lot of people who are prepared to defend back Gary Lineker. I was defending him on the basis of free speech, not necessarily what he said. But is there anybody who can publicly say, I support what Suella Braverman is doing?
Yeah,
I think there are too many people coming here illegally and not get cancelled from other media.
And I say it 100%.
I am saying that if you are going to be for something, you should be prepared to take the against.
And Gary Lineker is a rich, entitled celebrity exploiting his position on the BBC.
But he has also earned the right. He's earned the right and the space to voice what
by the way,
he believes.
he's paid too much.
Bushra Sheikh, always good to see you. Now, still to come, is it time to defund the BBC? As we were saying, has Gary Lineker proved that he's bigger than the channel? More on that in the next hour. You are with GB News. First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the people's channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Here on GB News Live, we'll be keeping you in the picture, finding out what's happening across the country and finding out why it matters to you. We'll have the facts fast with our team of reporters and specialist correspondents. Wherever it's happening, we'll be there from 12 noon on TV, radio and online. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even some ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions are, those days are gone, I can tell you.
She's only teasing. Go on.
He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Nana Akue, Saturday and Sunday afternoons on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as me and my panel tackle some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines. It's a place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride.
Oh, she's on it today.
Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank, and of course, fun. Every Saturday and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel.
Very good morning. It is 10 o'clock on Tuesday, the 14th of March. Welcome to The Point with me, Bev Turner, and Andrew Pearce.
And coming up today, the crisis at the BBC. Lineker's back, shrouded in controversy, and now the BBC are accused of hanging Fiona Bruce out to dry, and with 1,000 people a week being criminalised for not paying the licence fee. Is it time, finally, to defund the state broadcaster?
Splashing out, gripped by an energy crisis and cost of living disaster, the Prime Minister has found some spare cash to pay to upgrade the electricity grid to heat his own private swimming pool. Is he out of touch? Let me know what you think.
Just a bit. Heading down a dangerous road, China's stark warning to Britain as the Britons announced that pact to build nuclear submarines with the United States and Australia. Rishi doing all of that in America today.
And Braverman blasts migrant bill critics, accusing out-of-touch lefties, as she said, of trying to derail her asylum plan. So are the government's proposals to get a grip of migration back on track? We'll find out.
So let us know what you think on those stories this morning. You know how to do it. You email us at gbviews@gbnews.uk.
This dress isn't working today, Andrew. I'm not happy about this dress. I've just caught notes of myself in the monitor.
She's ad-libbing.
No, it doesn't look particularly good. Sorry about the dress, everybody. It's taking its toll finding outfits every day.
I think my suit's fine, though.
I think you're all right. There's a clash. There's a terrible clash of tie and dress. Sorry. Right, let me know what you think. gbviews@gbnews. Okay, not about my dress, but about everything else we're talking about today. But first of all, here is the news with Tamsin Roberts.
They're going to tell you about your dress.
Bev, thank you. Good morning from the GB newsroom. It's 2 minutes past 10. The Chancellor is looking at increasing the lifetime pension allowance in an attempt to reverse the trend of early retirements. It's understood Jeremy Hunt is considering allowing individuals to put more money into their pension pot before being taxed. The current lifetime allowance stands at just over £1 million, with savers incurring tax after that personal pension pot threshold has been exceeded. The measures are expected to be unveiled at tomorrow's budget as the Chancellor looks to increase Britain's workforce to help stimulate the economy. The Prime Minister and US President have discussed increased assertiveness from China with an agreed approach to engage and maintain talks with the country. Rishi Sunak and Joe Biden met in San Diego alongside the Australian Prime Minister to announce a new submarine programme between the three countries. Mr Sunak outlined security steps in the UK, with the leaders discussing the importance of working together for global stability. The President says he intends to visit Northern Ireland in April, whilst Mr Sunak has been invited to go to Washington in June. Security Minister Tom Tugendhat told GB News it requires a multi-agency government effort to tackle the threat from China.
The AUKUS element, the defence element that the Prime Minister was in San Diego signing, is only one aspect of it, and there's much more about this to come. So this is a whole-of-government approach. It involves education, it involves the police, it involves so many different aspects of our intelligence services that this is a huge, I'm afraid, challenge. It's true, because there are some areas where we've got to engage. We've got to engage with our eyes wide open, and this is something I've always said. We mustn't be naive. There were certainly some people who may have been in recent decades.
The rate of UK unemployment has remained unchanged at 3.7% in the 3 months to January. That's according to official data. Figures from the Office for National Statistics also show vacancies have fallen for the 8th month in a row as firms hold off from recruiting due to uncertainty and economic pressures. Real pay continues to fall despite a drop in the inflation rate. Tens of thousands of appointments and operations are expected to be cancelled as strikes by junior doctors enters its second day. NHS leaders say the 72-hour action is putting emergency care under significant pressure. The British Medical Association says junior doctors in England have suffered a 26% real terms cut to their pay. Last week, the Health Secretary invited the BMA to talks, but the union rejected them due to unacceptable preconditions imposed by the government. Latest figures show only a fraction of police officers facing complaints over the treatment of women were sacked. National Police Chiefs Council data shows of the 1,500 officers and staff who were accused of violence against women and girls, just 1% left the force. It also found more than 1,000 complaints were made against police conduct in a 6-month period. Complaints relate to various allegations against police in England and Wales between October 2021 and March 2022, including sexual harassment. The government's illegal migration bill has passed its second reading in the House of Commons with a majority of 62, despite concerns from Conservative backbenchers. Several Tory MPs had called for amendments to the bill, but MPs voted 312 to 250 in favour. The legislation would allow for the removal of migrants who arrive in the UK illegally. It will now proceed to the committee stage. Immigration lawyer Skylar McKeith told us the current system in place is unsustainable, but it's likely this new bill will face more backlash.
The bill creates a large number of people potentially having to live in limbo at public expense for an unknown amount of time, which could become very costly for the UK taxpayer. So really, the Home Office needs to put in place agreements for removal with safe third countries to ensure that they're not in breach of their own legislation.
Paedophile and former pop star Gary Glitter has been sent back to jail for breaking bail conditions less than 6 weeks after being released. The 78-year-old had been freed last month after being jailed in 2015 for sexually abusing 3 schoolgirls. He had served 8 years behind bars after serving half of his 16-year sentence. Musician Brian May will be awarded with a knighthood later today. The lead guitarist for the band Queen is known for some of the most iconic riffs in popular music, including the famous solo on Don't Stop Me Now. He'll be awarded the honours at Buckingham Palace after being recognised for his services to music and charity. The first stamps featuring the King's silhouette are to go on sale. Charles's uncrowned profile appears on a collection of 10 special stamps celebrating the nation's favourite flowers in a nod to the King's love of gardening. Royal Mail said the debut was a significant milestone, as the late Queen's silhouette has featured on special stamps since 1966. This is GB News. More from me shortly. Now, though, back to Bev and Andrew.
Very good morning. This is GB News, where we could try and get to the point of the big topics every morning. Still to come this hour, we're going to be speaking to boxing expert Spencer Oliver, who apparently will be giving us the latest on the super showdown between Tyson Fury and Alexander Usyk at Wembley Stadium. Can you tell I don't know what I'm talking about when I say that?
I know even less. Who and who?
We'll find out. Apparently it's a very important fight.
But first, that Home Secretary, she's got a big fight in her hands, to use that analogy, but it's cleared the first hurdle with the illegal migration bill. Let's call it Stop the Boats. Went through last night in the Commons with a majority of 62. Despite Tory rumbles and grumbles, not a single Tory MP voted against it. But it is only second reading stage.
That's right. Suella Braverman has said she will not back down. She's vowed not to be hectored by out-of-touch lefties.
And that legislation aims to stop migrants crossing the Channel in small boats. Prime Minister Rishi Sunak made it one of his 5 key priorities. If they arrive, they're going to be turned straight back. Yeah. That's the plan.
Well, the political editor at Daily Telegraph, Christopher Hope, joins us now, soon-to-be employee of GB News. Chopper, good to see you. Now,
hi, Bev.
Well, hi, good morning. We expected it to go through uncontested, largely by the Conservatives, as it did last night. What particular rounds, how many more rounds does she have to go through now to continue the boxing analogy?
Well, they're planning a full two days of on the floor of the House legislation being looked at. Then it'll go to the Lords. The Lords will be a big problem, but it'll be a fight which I think the government wants to have. If you're trying to fight the Lords in any battle with MPs against the Lords, you're always going to win because they have no real legitimacy there. It was interesting, I think, that Caroline Noakes, who was caught, said she has absolute horror about this bill, and Chris Skidmore, who said it broke international law. Both those two did not vote against. They abstained. Around 40 MPs abstained. Some of them would have permission. This is Tory MPs abstained. Some of them would have permission. It'd be interesting to find out if any others had issues. A big thing to watch out for is whether rebels on the right will attach an amendment to this to try and get Britain to pull out of the ECHR, the European Court of Human Rights. And that might need to go through against that with support from the Labour MPs, which could be a problem for the government.
They wouldn't get that through, Chris, would they?
They wouldn't get it through, Andrew, because Labour would vote with the government. But it's very embarrassing for Sunak because it'd have to go through with Labour MP support. It'd make Sunak himself look somewhat out of touch with what many want. Because the big concern here is how can this actually work? Because the ECHR, the European Court of Human Rights, may well step in. The government is ready for that fight. They know this bill will push the boundaries of what's allowed under ECHR, but they think it's a battle worth fighting. Don't forget, Sunak has not said when he wants to stop the boats by, merely that he will do. So that idea in his 5 pledges back in January isn't quite clear when it must be delivered.
Now, David Davis told us on this programme, he reminded us, Chris, how he and Jack Straw in 2018, the former Labour Home Secretary, 2 senior Tory, senior Labour, combined to repel the European Court, trying to impose prisoners having votes. And it was a massive vote in the Commons. They saw off the European Court. And the government's argument, again, Chris, I think, is they can do this again, whatever the judges say about the Stop the Boats bill.
The problem there, Andrew, that took 12 years, OK? That took 12 years for that fight to finally, to the MP's Parliament to marshal its efforts to get around it. You and I will be retired from GB News in 12 years' time, Andrew. Bev will still be going. Bev will carry on forever, but me and Andrew will be long gone. So I think it's an absolute urgency. It must happen for get the electoral benefit. Don't forget, I expect later this, I have no idea what will happen, but I'm sure there'll be an email going out from CCHQ today saying how Labour last night voted against immigration controls. This is the one area, I think, where I think the Tories are quite strong at the moment in politics.
That phrase, to get the electoral benefit, Christopher, that is going to be a phrase we're going to be using more and more and more in the next 18 months. How important is it that the Conservatives can win this particular policy, this area? It is important to people on the streets when we talk about what we would like to see our government do. Yes, they want to improve the cost of living, and yes, we need to look at inflation and interest rates and all of that, and safety and all of the things. NHS, education, stop me when I've got to the end of the list. But people do feel strongly about immigration, and particularly illegal immigration.
Well, that's totally right. It polls very highly all the time. It annoys people. They feel that many who voted for Brexit felt that taking back control of the borders was what was on the tin when they bought the baked beans in the supermarket. That's what they thought they were getting. And why hasn't it happened yet? That's the concern for people. And it is understood, I think, by Sunak. What Labour do is interesting. I mean, I heard Lord Blunkett, the former Home Secretary, at the weekend saying he thinks Labour should not oppose this. Let it go through and see if it works. Because if it works, it subneuters the problem for the next election.
Of course, at the moment, Chris, the Prime Minister, I'd have thought he would have wanted to be in the Commons last night, marshalling his troops, voting with the troops, while Keir Starmer's marshalling his troops to vote against it. But he's on the international stage. He's talking with the President of the United States, the Prime Minister of Australia, about this big deal for Britain to be involved in the supply of these nuclear energy submarines. Very important about restating our relationship with the States and Australia, and also to be a bulwark against Chinese influence.
Very, very important. It's a deal to build, a dozen or so subs up in Barrow. There's jobs in Barrow and in Derby where the engines are made. Then we transfer some of the technology down to Australia. They build them in South Australia. The same submarines, who have a fleet of the same submarines travelling the world. The Australian subs will have no nuclear weapons on. The ones that they'll be nuclear powered, because the problem is you've got to be at sea for a long time. The threat from China is so great there. I think there's already a reaction taking place on the world stage with President Xi from China meeting with President Putin in Russia next week. I mean, we are seeing a lot of big chess pieces moving around the globe at the moment, but as really the UK, Australia, and Great Britain and USA, forgive me, respond to China's behaviour over the past 10 years. There's a kind of reaction, and then a reaction to that reaction happening at the moment. It's a bit scary, but I think we need to know that this is done for our best interests, I think.
Yeah. I'm looking at your newspaper online, the Daily Telegraph. Gary Lineker, this is confirmed, hasn't it, that he's just bigger than the BBC?
It looks that way, doesn't it? I mean, in the sense that the way it played out, he hasn't really had to apologise. Tim Davies, the Director General, has apologised. It hasn't really worked out for the BBC. It's another time when they've been found quite wanting. Where this goes long term, there's a big concern now that these new rules on social media engagement won't be ready for a few months. Will other presenters see this as an opportunity to use the Lineker clause to pile in on government issues? I mean, the budget tomorrow could be a moment when you have other presenters saying, well, I'll have my say now, and where does that leave impartiality? I think the board is supporting Tim Davies for now. The government is trying to stay out of it, but there's definitely a worry about where it leaves the BBC over the medium term.
Just briefly, Chris, we had Jacob Rees-Mogg here yesterday saying it's the end now. They've got to be defunded, lose the licence, because all pretension at impartiality is gone. How many Tory MPs are you talking to at Westminster who are saying much the same?
I mean, dozens say that, and we know they believe that. The question is, what can you replace it with? Would it be a Netflix-style subscription model? How would that work? Would you have? Well, maybe why not? I mean, but would it work? There is Nadine Dorries had a review of this. We're going to see something in medium term on what she thinks may work. But I think the problem is if you get rid of impartiality, it's hard to justify the licence fee.
Absolutely. Yeah, it really is. Thank you, Christopher. Christopher Hope there, political editor of the Daily Telegraph, soon to be political editor of GB News, and he's the best in the business, and we are so happy to have him.
Now on Stop the Boats Bill, our own political reporter Olivia Utley's in Westminster this morning. Olivia, job well done last night for the Tories,
Hello.
Would you say? Morning. Job well done for the Tories last night?
Good morning. It certainly was a job well done. The bill
sailed through its second reading stage, and as you mentioned earlier there was not a single Tory abstention. There are a couple of MPs who spoke out very, very firmly against the bill before the vote last night, including Caroline Noakes and Chris Skidmore, but both chose to abstain. The only fly in the ointment really for Rishi Sunak was Theresa May's eviscerating speech on the bill, but that could only be to be expected because the bill is essentially designed to unwind her modern slavery legislation, which she sees as her biggest legacy. There are two problems really going forwards for Rishi Sunak. One of them is, of course, what happens in the Lords, but as Chris Hope mentioned there, obviously the Commons has more sort of legitimacy in the eyes of the public than the Lords, so the Lords will be reluctant to show too much antagonism towards this bill, which has proved to be very popular with both Conservative MPs and with the public. And then, of course, what happens when it gets through to the courts. But perhaps the more urgent issue, which Chris again mentioned there, is this issue of MPs on the right of the Conservative Party tabling this amendment at committee stage, which would amend the bill to mean that pushing for Britain to leave the European Court of Human Rights. Now, Rishi Sunak wants to avoid that. He considers that the nuclear option, and he thinks that it would undo some of the good work he's done in the last few weeks trying to reset Britain's relationship with Europe and put Britain back onto the world stage as a sort of major player. But as I think was mentioned again earlier, that idea is quite popular in the public. The idea of leaving the European Court of Human Rights is quite popular. So if Tory MPs push that through, it would certainly be pushed it through to voting stage. It would certainly be very embarrassing for Rishi Sunak. The extra added problem there is that Suella Braverman has made very, very clear, the Home Secretary has made clear, that she personally supports leaving the European Court of Human Rights. She says she acknowledges that that's not government policy. She's not trying to change government policy. But just 6 months ago, she said that it's her personal view that Britain should leave the ECHR. So if that argument raises its head again, we could see some inter-cabinet fighting, and that could be awkward.
And you know, Olivia, of course, people like Nigel Farage say the only way this migrant crossing situation is going to be fixed is by leaving the European Court of Human Rights. That's the same view taken by Richard Tice from the Reform Party. So that could be quite a powerful political weapon for them come the next general election if this migrants crisis isn't sorted.
Absolutely. We've got this issue of what happens to those migrants once they've been detained here for 28 days. If their cases are still being held up in the European Court of Human Rights, what is the government supposed to do? Do those people then become stateless? There are lots of logistical issues which Conservative MPs, Nigel Farage, Richard Tice, etc., believe would essentially be resolved by leaving the ECHR. So it is a very tempting option, and you can see why that's going to be quite tricky for the Prime Minister.
OK, thank you, Olivia. Olivia Otley there. We're going to be bringing you the sentencing in the next section of the show about Eleanor Williams. This is a fascinating story. This is the woman who basically made false rape allegations against members of an Asian grooming gang. That was her allegation. And several of them took their own lives under the trauma of that. We're going to be getting the results of her sentencing with Mark White, and you have been getting in touch as well. Christine says, hello, Andrew and Bev. Interesting listening to the varying viewpoints on the new migration bill we aim to please, Christine. I live in Malta, and the Labour government's position here is the same as the UK.
I like this. Lee says, I'm not a Lib Dem, but I always like hearing Vince Cable's views. He's decent. As for Sunak's Paul, what's he thinking? It's madness that he's harping on about net zero, yet he's doing what he's doing. Couldn't agree more. Yeah. Electricity is currently no greener than gas. This point needs to be pushed forward time and time again.
Absolutely. And Anne has said, it might be Rob, it's Anne. Rishi's wealth is not a problem for me, except the insult that I've received from the Departments of Work and Pensions, who've informed me that next year I'll be entitled to a 25p increase per week in my state pension. That is £1 per month, less 20%.
Do you know, Gordon Brown got into a lot of trouble over this a few years ago when it was a 10p increase and it caused a huge backlash and they've actually had to rewrite the next year's budget. That's going to be a problem.
Yeah, it really is.
Cost of living crisis.
Yeah.
Cost of energy. 25p.
It's a disgrace.
It's insulting.
Keep your views coming, won't you? GBviews at gbnews.uk. And still to come, Andrew and I are very excited about this. Apparently it's going to be a boxing match between Tyson Fury and Ukrainian Oleg Usyk at Wembley Stadium. And we're going to tell you why that is exciting in just a moment.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I have walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. I campaigned in the largest democratic vote in our island story. I know this country has so much to be proud of. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better. The wisdom of the nation is in its people. Vox Populi, Vox Dei. That's why I'm joining the People's Channel. Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
It's 10:24. This is Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner with To The Point on GB News. The World Boxing Association has confirmed an agreement has been reached in principle between boxing superstars Tyson Fury and Alexander Usyk, if that's how you pronounce it. Forgive me if it isn't. But there's still a few stumbling blocks over payments and a proposed rematch clause.
So the two heavyweights hold the division's 4 titles between them, and the winner would take it all to see who is the undisputed champion. So joining us now, we have former European champion and boxing pundit Spencer Oliver. Good morning, Spencer. Now, just to put all our cards on the table, we don't know what we're talking about we don't know what we're talking about when it comes to boxing. So tell us why this is such a big deal.
Well, it's a huge fight. I mean, Lennox Lewis was the last undisputed heavyweight champion. That was back in 1999. So, as you can tell, you know, undisputed doesn't come round very often, and it's a fight that we've been wanting to see now for a few years, and hopefully we can get it over the line on April the 29th. I'm hearing from good resources that this fight is going to happen. You know, they've agreed to the 70-30 split in favour of Tyson Fury. I think Alexander Usyk originally wanted a 60-40 split. Winner takes 60, loser takes 40. But Tyson Fury got his own way. He got the 70-30 split. He said he was the A side. So hopefully we get it over the line. You know, it's one of those fights. Fury's the WBC champ. Usyk's the IBF, WBA, WBO champ. And we need to see it. You know, it's for the boxing fans. And more importantly, it's not going to Saudi Arabia. It's happening at Wembley, which is great for the fans, you know.
But I thought Tyson Fury said he was never going to fight again.
Tyson Fury says a lot of things, guys, that, you know, he changes his mind Depends what side of the bed he gets out of, if I'm totally honest. And that's been the same here in this build-up to this, because a lot of people felt that Fury was just trying to didn't want to take the fight with Alexander Usyk, and that's why he was calling for the 70-30 split. Usyk called his bluff and said, give me the fight, let's have it. You donate £1 million to Ukraine and we'll get the fight on. So there we go, and it looks like we will get him.
And so this would be in April, Spencer. That's round the corner. Can you just book Wembley? I feel like, are you free on a date in April? Yeah, we are. Can we have the world's biggest boxing fight there? You think these things would be years in the planning, or months at least?
Absolutely. It's a little bit more complicated than that, actually, Bev. I think it has been booked now for some time. I think they provisionally booked it. They booked hotels. So everything was in place. Right. I think because they felt that they was going to get this fight. You know, it was one of those fights that it's the obvious fight now for Tyson Fury. If he wants to cement his legacy, this is the type of fight that he has to have. If he wants to be the best of the modern era, he's got to fight the best. And Alexander Usyk and Anthony Joshua probably are the only two names that he hasn't boxed. I mean, you got to respect Fury for what he's done. You know, went over to Germany, beat Vladimir Klitschko to win the world heavyweight title when no one expected him to do that. Then he went to America 3 times to beat Deontay Wilder, the most ferocious puncher around at the moment. So you respect what he does. Now let's see if he gets his fight over the line with Alexander Usyk, who's a very slippery southpaw. We saw that. He defeated Anthony Joshua a couple of times, and he's probably Tyson Fury's toughest opponent out there. So it's going to be interesting, but I believe we get it.
Spencer, how big and heavy is Tyson Fury? Because he looks like a walking giant.
Listen, I have to interview him. So to give you an idea, I'm like 5'5", and Tyson's like, I don't know, 6'9", 6'10". He's around that sort of size, 19.5 stone, around that size. So he's a giant of a man, an absolute giant of a man.
What would the purse be for a fight like this for both of them? What would they both walk away with?
Well, this was what the arguments were all about, Bev. I think that Tyson Fury felt that he was worth a lot more than what the Saudis were originally offering. I think they put in an offer in the beginning of January. They put in 2 separate offers. Alexander Usyk accepted his offer and Tyson Fury refused his. He felt it was worth more than that. So we come here to Wembley. I don't know what the purse would be. I would imagine that you're talking somewhere in the region of £50 million, something like that.
Wow.
Not bad. We have to ask you, Spencer, in your honest estimation, is he going to win it, Tyson Fury? Is our boy going to win, or our giant?
Absolutely, I believe so. I think that Tyson Fury has a better boxing IQ, and he's big. He's too big. I mean, Alexander Usyk is very, very talented, but for me, he's a little bit too small. And I think that, Tyson Fury's, like I say, his boxing IQ and his ring craft will get him through against a guy that is brilliant, but has come up from cruiserweight. And I just think size will matter in this contest.
Spencer, you are a sports commentator, you're a sports presenter. I can't have you here without asking you your thoughts on Gary Lineker and whether somebody who has one foot in sport should also have one foot in politics and say those opinions freely to the nation. What do you think?
Listen, I think that Gary's entitled to his opinion, if I'm totally honest. He was just airing that opinion, and I know that sometimes we live in a world now that is very political, and and it's difficult to do. But I sort of back him for what he said. I think he's entitled to his freedom of speech. He's entitled to his opinion. I don't see why he's not allowed that. So yeah, that's where
if you were working for the BBC, if you were working for the BBC as a boxing commentator, and they said you're not allowed to say anything, would you do as you were told, or would you take someone on?
Well, do you know what it is, Bev? We live in a world where sometimes you've got to bite your lip and you've got to get on with whatever you're told to do, and that's the world we live in. It depends how much you're willing to risk that job and put that job on the line for you to air your views. I suppose that's probably why. I mean, I've been known to be a little bit controversial in my time, if I'm totally honest, Bev. So, sometimes my mouth runs away with me and gets me into a little bit of trouble because I speak my mind.
Yeah. Well, that's why you fit in well here. Come back anytime, Spencer. Won't you? Great to see you. Yeah. Boxing IQ.
Never who'd have thought the expression. I guess you need
learnt a lot there.
Ring craft to outwit your opponent, not just outpunch him.
Yeah. Boxing IQ.
Don't forget, you have female boxing too, and we had an Olympic champion female boxer whose name I can't remember.
Adams, Nicola Adams.
There we are.
Now, still to come, Eleanor Williams is going to be sentenced any moment now. This is a story I mentioned before. 3 men tried to take their own lives over her claims of rape. We're going to be getting the news on her sentencing in just a moment. That's after your morning's news with Tamsin.
Bev, thank you. It's 10:32. Here are the headlines. The Chancellor is looking at increasing the lifetime pension allowance in an attempt to reverse the trend of early retirement. It's understood Jeremy Hunt is considering allowing individuals to put more money into their pension pot before being taxed. The current lifetime allowance stands at just over £1 million, with savers incurring tax after that personal pension pot threshold has been exceeded. The measures are expected to be unveiled at tomorrow's budget as the Chancellor looks to increase Britain's workforce to help stimulate the economy. The Prime Minister and US President have discussed increased assertiveness from China with an agreed approach to engage and maintain talks with the country. Rishi Sunak and Joe Biden met in San Diego alongside the Australian Prime Minister to announce a new submarine programme between the three countries. Mr Sunak outlined security steps in the UK, with the leaders discussing the importance of working together for global stability. Security Minister Tom Tugendhat told GB News it requires a multi-agency government effort to tackle the threat from China.
The AUKUS element, the defence element that the Prime Minister was in San Diego signing, is only one aspect of it, and there's much more about this to come. So this is a whole-of-government approach. It involves education, it involves the police, it involves so many different aspects of our intelligence services that this is a huge, I'm afraid, challenge. It's true, because there are some areas where we've got to engage. We've got to engage with our eyes wide open, and this is something I've always said. We mustn't be naive. There were certainly some people who may have been in recent decades.
Latest data show vacancies have fallen for the 8th month in a row as firms hold off from recruiting due to uncertainty and economic pressures. The Office for National Statistics has found the rate of UK unemployment has remained unchanged at 3.7% in the 3 months to January. It said real pay continues to fall despite a drop in the inflation rate. TV, online, DAB Plus radio and on TuneIn. This is GB News. Now back to Andrew and Bev.
Well, Eleanor Williams will be sentenced any moment now over false rape claims. You're with GB News.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512,
Virgin Media Channel 604,
Freesat Channel 216,
Freeview Channel 236,
and YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio,
with the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned.
I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions are, those days are gone, I can tell you. She's only teasing. Go on. He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, "Nana, stop arguing." I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Very good morning. Thank you for joining us. It's 10:37. This is To The Point on GB News with me, Bev Turner, and Andrew Pearce.
Eleanor Williams is due to be sentenced this morning. It's a shocking case for perverting the course of justice as 3 men tried to take their own lives after she falsely accused them of rape.
Joining us now is GB News Home and Security Editor Mark White. Mark, this story is one of those which you read the detail of it and you can't quite believe how strange, how unusual and how sort of sick the actions of this girl were. Tell us what happened.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very disturbing case. This young woman, Eleanor Williams from Barrow-in-Furness in Cumbria, they first came to public attention when she posted a picture on Facebook. We're going to show that image now. It is rather disturbing because it shows her very bruised up face. She claimed that she was effectively assaulted and raped by a grooming gang of Asian men in Barrow. That prompted, as you would imagine, worldwide outrage. She became the centre of a campaign called Justice for Ellie. Posts were shared by celebrities, including Countdown's Rachel Riley. Money was raised for her. The police investigating it, though, found a lot of inconsistencies in what she was saying. They eventually, in searching her home, actually found a hammer, bloodstained, which they said was used to create those bruises to her face.
Used by herself. She used a hammer on her own face. This was an incredibly thought-through deception.
There's no doubt, yes. Clearly the lengths that she went to smash her face with a hammer, but also the sort of elaborate stories she made up about how she was groomed. She accused one man, Mohammed Ramzan, a local businessman in Barrow, of grooming her from the age of 12, of selling her, auctioning her off in a plot, the prosecution said, straight from that Liam Neeson movie Taken, that was all about, trafficking and auctioning off young women, of making her work in a brothel. The prosecution, though, said that the checks that they'd done from the time when she was making these allegations showed that this man, Ramzan, was actually back in Barrow. He was using his card in a B&Q in Barrow at that time. There's others she accused. A young man called Oliver Gardner was accused of rape and trafficking, all kinds of other offences. He had met her for less than a minute on a night out in Preston. They'd been seen on CCTV going down an alley. He said, look, there was a brief sexual encounter. There was no more than a minute. That was supported by the CCTV cameras. So again, an allegation that just wasn't true. And the really disturbing element to this story as well, there are multiple people that she falsely accused of rape and other sexual offences. 3 of these men, including Mohammed Ramzan, Oliver Gardner, who I mentioned there, and another young man called Justin Trengove, actually went on to try to take their own lives.
How terrible.
Because of the trauma that they suffered, because they were publicly outed.
And that is the whole point, isn't the big argument we have about this, Mark? Should people accused of rape be named until they're either charged or actually convicted?
Yeah, I mean, it's a campaign and an issue that has really raged, and there's never been a satisfactory outcome, really, as far as those who would like to see people that are accused of a very serious offence like this given the same kind of anonymity until prosecution, a successful prosecution. Those on the other side of the argument, of course, prosecutors and the police say it's often clearly very useful to a prosecution case to have names out there because there can be people who are guilty of perpetrating repeat offences and other victims that are out there, and a single allegation can sometimes be very difficult to prove in the courts. But actually, when you have multiple victims coming forward, that strengthens the case against an individual. It's a very difficult area, but there's no doubt that those accused of very serious offences like rape have their lives turned upside down as well.
So she's found guilty, the actual charges of perverting the course of justice. I imagine that's the worst that they can pin on her. Is there such an offence as sort of false? No, there isn't. Of course there isn't.
It is effectively that.
It can have quite a long sentence, though, with it, I understand.
Absolutely. I think there's no doubt that there will be a custodial sentence added. I mean, one of these young men spent 73 days himself on remand in prison, sharing a cell
with a
convicted sex offender.
How does he get that out of his head?
Well, exactly. How do you? Because your life will be forever changed by that experience, and we all know as well when it comes to issues such as allegations of sexual offences, even though you can be cleared, as they all have now by this process, they've been cleared, but the allegations are still out there, and there are still people willing to believe that there is no
smoke without fire. That's
absolutely.
That's the cliche.
We're getting the verdict at about 11:30.
That's the time we're expecting it. Yeah, we should get a bit of background to this case as well. It's going to be televised, so we'll hear from the judge summing up, really, just before passing sentence, the very real impact that it had on the lives of these men.
And you'll bring that to us live when it happens. Mark White, thanks so much for joining us. Now, back to the Stop the Boats bill. It passed through its common stages last night. I'm delighted to say we're now joined by the immigration lawyer, Harjap Singh Bangal. Good afternoon to you.
Good morning.
Morning, you're quite right. Correct.
It's been a long morning.
It's been a long morning. Yes, it has been a long morning. We enjoy working together so much, you see, time just flies by.
It does.
Can I ask you... The bill went through, the anticipated Tory rebellion didn't take place. It's going to go through its common stages very easily. Are you pleased about this, or are you disappointed there hasn't been more opposition?
There has been opposition, but I think with the majority that the Conservative government has, it literally can push through anything it wants, really, without, even if there is opposition to it, even if, say, 20 or 30 MPs did oppose it, they'd still have a large majority to push it through. So it's gone through now, and let's see if it gets amended further or whether it gets sent back. Or however, it looks like it will go through in its current form pretty much.
Sorry, Andrew, go on.
Breaking news. I think we're getting this sentence, are we, on Eleanor Williams? Are we getting that?
Yeah.
No, we're not.
No,
no. We've just hearing. Actually, we've just said that the Question Time presenter, Fiona Bruce, has now resigned as an ambassador for refuge after the backlash over what she said on Question Time. But we're going to stay with you. We'll bring you more on that story later. Harj, carry on in full flow, please.
Yeah, I think it will pass in its current form. The key is to implementation of it, of how it's going to be implemented. That the practicalities haven't been informed to us. We haven't been told where people are going to be removed to, because we don't actually have the return agreements as such to send people back, other than with 6 countries. So, or the detention centre that's going to be built, how many people it's going to hold. Will it be big enough to hold 50,000 people? What happens after 28 days detention? Will these people be let out on a 29th day? Are they going to accept claims to process? So there's a lot of detail yet that hasn't, although it's written down, we haven't been told how it's going to come into practice. And I think that's what everyone's looking at.
OK, all right, Harjap. Sorry, it was brief today, but no doubt we will have you on, I imagine, soon. This story is ongoing, of course. Harjap Singh Bangal there. Now, our panel are here this morning. I'm delighted to say that snuck in during that interview, Amy Nicole and London Assembly member Sean Bailey. Good to see you both. Right, we're going to start with this story about Fiona Bruce, guys. She was trying to effectively do her job, wasn't she, on Question Time? Somebody mentioned about Stanley Johnson having allegations of domestic abuse. This is what she said.
For a change, I'm not blaming Boris Johnson or Stanley Johnson. Actually, Ken, he was a wife-beater, Stanley Johnson, on record.
OK, let me just intervene. I'm not disputing what you're saying, but just so everyone knows what this is referring to. So Stanley Johnson's wife spoke to a journalist, Tom Bauer, and she said that Stanley Johnson had broken her nose and she had ended up in hospital as a result. Stanley Johnson has not commented publicly on that. Friends of his have said it did happen, it was a one-off.
Yes, but it did happen.
So because of that, the charity that Fiona Bruce works with have said she was excusing him and kind of defending it. If you just hit somebody once, it's not domestic abuse. What do you make of this, Sean?
I didn't hear her say anything of the sort. I think she was doing her job because she does have to clarify, because in that situation, you have people piling on. She has to give some context. Of course, it's a charity's prerogative to remove whoever they like. But I think what we're seeing is our country's huge inability to have any kind of nuanced debate. It's a shame, because she strikes me as a very level-headed, useful ambassador. But this, for me, is just another way of anybody who's outraged, we then have to remove someone from their job. And I'd say to anyone in public life, we need to get a handle on this, because you can always find someone who's upset, so therefore you can always lose your job.
Wouldn't it have been worse if she hadn't clarified it?
Well, exactly, that's what I was thinking. We spent a whole of last week talking about BBC not having impartiality over the whole Gary Lineker hoo-ha, and now somebody's actually done their job and tried to bring in a bit of impartiality, which is what I think she was doing. I think anybody who watches it... Exactly, she was providing context, which she always does on Question Time, and look what it's landed her in. And I think the interesting thing is that now she has attracted possibly more criticism than Stanley Johnson.
Yeah,
in this whole situation.
Yes, I was just going to come on to that, actually, because what we should really be talking about is Boris Johnson giving his father a knighthood, not this distraction.
But this is what happens. If you look at the Gary Lineker thing, people have been saying free speech. It's got absolutely nothing to do with free speech. He is a civil servant. He's paid by the public purse. He should behave like other civil servants. But, of course, if you can attach something different to an argument, it's what people go down. They go down that cul-de-sac and the real issue doesn't get discussed. I feel really sorry for her, because, in a way, what we're seeing is cancel culture in action. And many people in particular parts of the political firmament loved cancel culture because they thought they controlled it. Now we're seeing as a beast that will eat anyone.
I think this is something slightly different, though. I think this is something we're seeing more of, which is in this intent to mischaracterise what people are saying by clipping them and putting them on social media. I mean, I've fallen victim of it myself on this channel, you know, where people just want to have a problem by mischaracterising what you've said.
I do agree with that.
And Yasmin Alibi-Brown, who was on the show, she has also said, now we're talking about Fiona Bruce and her potential, you know, terrible mistake over Boris Johnson and knighting his dad, and Stanley Johnson doing whatever he did, which are clearly the things that deserve the most criticism in this whole conversation.
And I've read that book by Tom Bauer about Stanley Johnson. It was well argued that that's what took place. No denial from Boris Johnson, no denial from Stanley Johnson. So it is given now that that took place, and she was merely clarifying it on air, and the charity has chucked her, thrown her to the wolves.
Look, I'll say again, the charity is their prerogative, they can do as they please. But what's really important to me in this instance, it's a really good, decent piece of journalism.
Yeah.
She was just saying, OK, that's a very strong allegation. It happens to be true, but let's just give it some context.
And a lot of people watching wouldn't know anything about the allegation, which is why she had to put it in context. Otherwise, people saying, what? Why is that woman saying that?
Ironically, that is the kind of thing that the BBC should be known for, that sort of clarification. It was really, in her way, she was basically saying, look, we're not coming down on any side, we're just letting you know the facts, and here's a little balance to that.
And he isn't here to defend himself.
Exactly.
It was the right of reply. They were always moaning about right of reply, and that was a perfect example. I haven't seen one commentator suggesting that the decision by Refuge has been the correct one.
No.
And it's very rare that we all agree on something.
Yes, and may it not continue for very long.
And also, I mean, in terms of Yasmin Alibi-Brown, the allegation about the domestic abuse is irrelevant, really irrelevant for whether he deserves a knighthood or not for being the son of Boris Johnson. You know, it was a bit of a weak argument from her point of view, I thought.
No, but that's her. She almost forced that clarification because she was trying to pile on. Because if you look at the state of journalism in this country, I would say particularly on the left, it's all personal attacks, and she was carrying out the sort of thing that her and her ilk would always do.
Yeah, good point.
Right, we're going to talk about another story.
Yeah, so
How
this
many
is
it?
1,500 UK police officers accused of violence against women in 6 months, and the percentage of them who actually lose their jobs, Sean, 1%?
Firstly, it has to be said, this is shocking.
It really is.
Trust in the police is at an all-time low, and a stat like this is horrendous. If you look at the breakdown of these stats, there's two important things here. Firstly, 55% of them is into job, conduct. So it looks like it's not safe to be a police officer because other police officers will attack you if you're a woman. That's very important. But the other piece, which I wonder if so many officers haven't been, removed from job because they're officers of the Crown. And I do realise it's harder to sack someone who's an officer of the Crown. That's the first thing. The second thing, I just don't think the police are working hard enough for this. They have a culture that defends poor behaviour of other police officers, and they need to work against that.
We've seen the big high-profile ones like Wayne Couzens and that shocking case of David Carrick. Remember, he raped women, exploiting the fact he was in uniform. You're safe with me. These statistics, 1,500, 1%, what's that going to do to restore trust in the police?
Well,
I'd say particularly among women.
Yeah, the implications for women's trust in the system. People like to say the optics of this, they ain't good. This, coupled with David Carrick, Wayne Couzens, the rampant misogyny and sexism that we've seen in policing in those WhatsApp groups.
Yeah.
I think this raises a big point about vetting and making sure that absolutely no one with even the slightest suggestion of a history of domestic violence or any violence against women should be allowed in the police. And that will only come with more investment into the police so that we can see exactly who's getting through and being part of the force. But let's put this into perspective as well. Only 5% of crimes overall are being solved.
Yeah.
But the real thing about vetting is it's not so much about the resources of the police, it's about the willingness to do it. Because one of the interesting things about this, many of these police officers would have passed first vetting. What happens about vetting once they're in the force? That's the key thing. The other thing to really look at, while we stamp this behaviour out, and it will need stamping out, we're going to have to tread a very careful line on not removing the authority of the police, because when you remove that authority, we're all at risk. And that's why how the public view the police is so important.
Yeah.
I think the public view of the police is at an all-time low. And this sort of headline is shocking. And we've been warned that there's going to be a Metropolitan Police virtually in court once a week for the next year.
The unfortunate thing for the Metropolitan Police, they are the biggest service.
Yeah, of course.
So they have the most to offer. But the new commissioner seems to be open to making change. And I've spoken to a number of police officers who are...
That's Mark Rowley.
Yes,
yeah.
who are a little bit worried. He's made them feel uncomfortable, but they understand why. Because most police officers would want to get rid of this behaviour. Imagine for a second your son or daughter is in this service and you're exposed to this.
But you say
want it
that,
removed.
but then it's 1% of police officers who are under these investigations. So that's 1 in 100 police officers. So this doesn't seem like a situation where you could say, oh, most are great, it's a few bad apples. I don't think that flies anymore. This is systemic.
It certainly is a few bad apples. Remember, look at the things that the police force has done to this country continually. Sorry, police service, not police force. And yes, this is a large number as a total figure, but as a percentage of the force, it's actually small. It's unacceptably high, but it is small, and we just have to stamp on it, because imagine a country where the police do not have any authority. All of the most vulnerable people in this country would be at extreme risk. That's why we need to get on top of it quickly, but we mustn't destroy the service in doing it.
If we live in a country where currently only 5% of crimes are solved, how is our police force fit for purpose?
Well, that's because of what we asked them to do. We asked our police officers to chase people across the internet rather than chase them across the park. You can report a crime because you're upset. That's why our police are not arresting people, because they're having to deal with nonsense around...
Or is it because there's not enough of them? So 10,000 police less than 2010. So really, shouldn't there be enough police to chase me across
chase you across the park rather than the internet.
Yeah,
Listen,
I want enough police for both those things.
You could always argue for more police officers, but what we really need to do is look at how we feel about crime as a society.
Yeah, absolutely. Sean Bailey, Amy Nicole, we're done for round one. Up next, we're going to be speaking to former BBC journalist and presenter Nick Owen. Is Gary Lineker bigger than the Beeb? More to come on that in the next hour.
Hello again, it's Aidan McGivern here from the Met Office. A much colder day today for most of us, with snow showers for some, but actually plenty of sunshine as well. Brighter skies compared with yesterday. Less windy, but the winds now are coming from the north, and they are bringing a return to winter in some locations, but any wintry weather less widespread compared with much of last week. And it's across Scotland, Northern Ireland, North West England and North Wales where we're likely to see these snow showers coming through. Accumulating snow largely above 200 metres, sleet and non-settling snow at lower levels. And some rain mixed in there as we go into the afternoon for parts of Wales and the Midlands. Further south, plenty of sunshine, 10 Celsius, although there's temperatures dropping away and feeling colder in the wind. Low single figures, meanwhile, for northern Scotland, where the snow showers gather pace overnight, and for Shetland in particular, could be a further dumping of significant snow, causing some impacts elsewhere across the UK. Actually, largely clear skies overnight. Temperatures falling away, I think, for some sheltered parts of northern Scotland, especially where we've got some snow cover, minus 12 Celsius. Otherwise, widely below freezing by a few degrees. Nevertheless, a bright start to the day for the vast majority, and we keep the sunshine there for Scotland into central and eastern England by lunchtime. A few more snow showers for Shetland, eventually easing. But further west, we've got rain sweeping in. That rain falling as snow initially over the hills of mid Wales and North Wales. And it's going to feel cold as that rain arrives. But temperatures are rising, and any snowfall across Northern Ireland turns back to rain quite soon. However, for Northern England and for Scotland, I think there'll be some further significant falls of snow over the hills above 100 or 200 metres. Another few centimetres, perhaps as much as 10 for central Scotland. Then it does turn properly milder on Thursday and Friday, with temperatures up in the mid-teens.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Deebs & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the people's channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512.
Virgin Media Channel 604.
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236.
And YouView, channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Nana Akue, Saturday and Sunday afternoons on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as me and my panel tackle some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines. It's a place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride.
Oh, she's on it today!
Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank, and of course, fun. Every Saturday and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Hello, it's 11 o'clock on Tuesday, 14th of March. Welcome to The Point with me, Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner.
Coming up this morning, crisis at the BBC. Lineker returns, but shrouded in controversy. And today, producers are accused of hanging Fiona Bruce out to dry. With 1,000 people a week being criminalised for not paying the licence fee, is it time to finally defund the state broadcaster?
I think it might be, and splashing out. We may be gripped by an energy and cost of living crisis, but not so the Prime Minister, who's found some spare cash to upgrade the electricity grid to heat his private swimming pool. Out of touch? I think so.
Yes, you did hear that correctly. Now, heading down a dangerous road, China's stark warning to Britain as the UK announces a pact to build nuclear submarines with the US and Australia.
And Home Secretary Braverman, she blasts migrant bill critics. She says, in characteristic Braverman language, they're out-of-touch lefties trying to derail her asylum plan.
So while the government's proposals to get a grip of migration back on track. We're also going to have the sentencing, aren't we, of Eleanor Williams. That should be happening in the next half an hour. Amazing story.
Yeah, she's the wicked woman who made up rape claims against several men, 3 of whom attempted to take their own lives. Wicked. I hope she gets a very long sentence.
Keep your views coming as well. GB Views at gbnews.uk. But first of all, here is news with Tamsin Roberts.
Bev, thank you and good morning from the GB newsroom. It's 3 minutes past 11. The Chancellor is looking at increasing the lifetime pension allowance in an attempt to reverse the trend of early retirements. It's understood Jeremy Hunt is considering allowing individuals to put more money into their pension pot before being taxed. The current lifetime allowance stands at just over £1 million, with savers incurring tax after that personal pension pot threshold has been exceeded. The measures are expected to be unveiled at tomorrow's budget as the Chancellor looks to increase Britain's workforce to help stimulate the economy. The Prime Minister and US President have discussed increased assertiveness from China with an agreed approach to engage and maintain talks with the country. Rishi Sunak and Joe Biden met in San Diego alongside the Australian Prime Minister to announce a new submarine programme between the 3 countries. Mr Sunak outlined security steps in the UK, with the leaders discussing the importance of working together for global stability. The President says he intends to visit Northern Ireland in April, whilst the Prime Minister has been invited to go to Washington in June. Security Minister Tom Tugendhat told GB News it requires a multi-agency government effort to tackle the threat from China.
The AUKUS element, the defence element that the Prime Minister was in San Diego signing, is only one aspect of it, and there's much more about this to come. So this is a whole-of-government approach. It involves education, it involves the police, it involves so many different aspects of our intelligence services that this is a huge, I'm afraid, challenge. It's true, because there are some areas where we've got to engage. We've got to engage with our eyes wide open, and this is something I've always said. We mustn't be naive. There were certainly some people who may have been in recent decades.
The latest figures show vacancies have fallen for the 8th month in a row as firms hold off from recruiting due to uncertainty and economic pressures. The Office for National Statistics has found the rate of UK unemployment has remained unchanged at 3.7% in the 3 months to January. It said real pay continues to fall despite a drop in the inflation rate. Tens of thousands of appointments and operations are expected to be cancelled as strikes by junior doctors enters its 2nd day. NHS leaders say the 72-hour action is also putting emergency care under significant pressure. The British Medical Association says junior doctors in England have suffered a 26% real terms cut to their pay. Last week, the Health Secretary invited the BMA to talks, but the union rejected them due to unacceptable preconditions imposed by the government. New figures show only a fraction of police officers facing complaints over their treatment of women were sacked. National Police Chiefs Council data shows of the 1,500 officers and staff who were accused of violence against women and girls, just 1% left the force. It also found more than 1,000 complaints were made against police conduct in a 6-month period. Complaints relate to various allegations against police in England and Wales between October 2021 and March 2022, including allegations of sexual harassment. The government's illegal migration bill has passed its second reading in the House of Commons with a majority of 62, despite concerns from Conservative backbenchers. Several Tory MPs had called for amendments to the bill, but MPs voted 312 to 250 in favour. The legislation would allow for the removal of migrants who arrive in the UK illegally. It will now proceed to the committee stage. Immigration lawyer Skylar McKeith told us the current system is unsustainable, but it's likely this new bill will face more backlash.
The bill creates a large number of people potentially having to live in limbo at public expense for an unknown amount of time, which could become very costly for the UK taxpayer. So really, the Home Office needs to put in place agreements for removal with safe third countries to ensure that they're not in breach of their own legislation.
Paedophile and former pop star Gary Glitter has been sent back to jail for breaking bail conditions less than 6 weeks after being released. The 78-year-old had been freed last month after being jailed in 2015 for sexually abusing 3 schoolgirls. He'd served 8 years behind bars after serving half of his 16-year sentence. Musician Brian May will be awarded with a knighthood later today. The lead guitarist for the band Queen is known for some of the most iconic riffs in popular music, including the famous solo on Don't Stop Me Now. He'll be awarded the honours at Buckingham Palace after being recognised for his services to music and charity. The first stamps featuring the King's silhouette are to go on sale. Charles's uncrowned profile appears on a collection of 10 special stamps celebrating the nation's favourite flowers in a nod to the King's love of gardening. Royal Mail said the debut was a significant milestone. The late Queen's silhouette has been featured on special stamps since 1966. This is GB News. More from me shortly. Now, though, back to Bev and Andrew.
Well, Gary Lineker's back as presenter of Match of the Day after his big bust-up with the BBC. They removed him last weekend. And guess what? 500,000 more people watched the programme. He'd faced criticism, of course, after he spoke out against the government's Stop the Boats bill.
So, BBC Director General Tim Davie denied the BBC had backed down, but with claims that the licence fee is criminalising poverty. As 1,000 people a week are prosecuted for failing to pay, is it time to defund the BBC?
Well, let's talk to Nicholas Owen. You'll know him, former BBC and ITV presenter. Nicholas, morning to you.
Good morning.
There's no other way to characterise what Tim Davie has done other than backing down.
Yeah, I think he had no alternative, did he? Really in a very nasty corner there. Very, very hard to see what else could have happened. There are those, a lot of Conservative MPs, it has to be said he should have said to Gary Lineker, well, sorry, mate, you broke the rules and we're gonna see this through. But when you're running a broadcasting organisation, you're dealing with very high-profile figures. You have to make some rather awkward choices. And they've done kicking the can down the road into the long grass, call it what you will. They're going to have a big review of their rules. Having worked for the BBC a lot over the years and loving the institution, I have to say, I think it's an extremely important one. But this is all very reminiscent of so many managerial snafus over those many years that I've been involved with them.
Nick, do you look sort of back with some relief that when you were on our TV every day, that you didn't have this pressure of social media, that you didn't have to think about whether you would go out publicly and tell the world what you thought?
Absolutely. I don't know about going out and telling the world what you think. This is a tricky area, isn't it? Let's be clear about this. Journalists, generally speaking, when they work for the BBC, you walk through the doors of the BBC, and indeed ITN, where I also worked for a long time. Impartiality, it's a tricky word, isn't it? But not telling people, not making clear your own opinions was absolutely part of the job. There didn't seem to be any difficulty. I've never found that a problem in my own case. Much easier not to leave your opinions at the door. But you're right, social media wasn't there. But what was there in my latter years at the BBC, people beginning to respond to everything you did all the time, calling you a clot, and much, much worse, I have to say. A lot of it had to be censored, the sort of things that people say. Yeah, it is a very, very tricky world now. But listen, the thing about Gary Lineker, I mean, this man is paid. He's the best paid person on the BBC, paid more than almost everybody else. I think he's paid more than Richard Attenborough, for goodness sake.
Yeah, 1.35 million. 1.35
That's
million,
right.
Nick.
Absolutely, an enormous amount of money. And somehow Mr. Lineker thinks he can then sort of blast off in any direction about any of his opinions. Not at all happy with that. I know others have done it. And if you stray over into the acting world, there's a lot of actors are quite politically opinionated, and we don't seem to mind about that. But I think when it's someone as high profile as Lineker, I'm afraid my sympathies were with Tim Davie, the Director General of the BBC. This is a knotty problem. He thought the rules were pretty clear, but they are not. And Gary Lineker exploited that.
And Nick, you don't buy the argument because Gary Lineker is a sports presenter, different rules apply to those who work in news and current affairs?
No, I don't buy that, really. I really don't. I can't see why. You know, I get very puzzled about this. I know football is sort of tremendously important in this country. The Director General himself has said that he always watches Match of the Day, absolutely besotted with it and so on. It's bizarre, isn't it? Why suddenly does a sports person get the right to do this sort of thing? I find it very puzzling. And I'll tell you something else. We're living at a time when other parts of the BBC are suffering a great deal. I know a lot of my old colleagues have either moved on or their jobs are under threat and so on. Economies constantly being made. The BBC singers have been axed. Yes. The only professional full-time choir. You know, that costs, I think they cost £1 million a year or something, not even as much as Gary Lineker's salary. They're going to be chopped. I mean, these priorities, chaps. For goodness sake, can't we get this in perspective? If Gary Lineker wants to go off somewhere else, as I'm sure he could, well, OK, I think the BBC might have to swallow that.
The allegation, Nick, of course, is that the BBC is institutionally left-wing, despite the fact that Tim Davie stood as a Conservative councillor, despite the fact that the chairman, Richard Sharp, is a Conservative. Do you agree with that analysis? And having worked there, was there very much a left-leaning bias amongst production?
No, I don't think there was. And I'll tell you a story that I don't think I've ever told on air before, but this did happen to me once. Or I was in the newsroom when this occurred. There was a piece in one of the newspapers, I can't remember which one of the right-wing newspapers, the Telegraph, let's say, somebody like that. And they accused, basically, the BBC News people of being absolutely obsessed with The Guardian, which, of course, is famously left-wing in general terms. And I can always remember the head of BBC News coming into the newsroom in a great sort of storming rage about that. And he came out to me and he said, you know, everybody says to me, oh, you know, you're so biased. You only read The Guardian. You only take notice of the left-wing press. He said, when I go down the newsroom, the only newspaper I see out on everybody's desks is the Daily Mail.
Right too. And quite right too.
Not because of politics, but because it was always a ruddy good newspaper. And that was the point. No, I didn't detect left-wing bias. Some of the younger people, perhaps, you know, their views like so many young people. But no. The commitment to impartiality was absolutely real. And there was a sort of automatic brake on it, if you like. People like, oh, so-and-so's like me would sometimes say, no, I better have a minute. Let's be careful here. Let's remember what we're all about, why people pay their licence fee. They don't pay their licence fee to hear that argument and that argument put and no other argument. I'm not suggesting I did more than a little bit to keep the balance there. And there'll always be good people keeping the balance.
OK, thank you so much, Nicholas Owen. Lovely to see you. Joining us now on this is former Liverpool footballer and Match of the Day pundit Mark Lawrenson, who I imagine, Mark, good morning. You must know Gary Lineker pretty well.
Yes, it would be fair to say that I do. Spent too many years, some would say, together.
Absolutely. So his behaviour throughout all of this is how would you characterise it? Typical? Praiseworthy? What do you make of what's happened in the last few days?
Well, it could be both, to be fair. He's certainly stuck to his guns. He's not backed down, and it would appear that the BBC have certainly gone down on one knee to him. I didn't agree with what he originally said, but all the rest of the stuff, I can't believe the fuss. You know, and if you really, really think about this, the actual topic that Gary was talking about, it doesn't even get a mention anymore. It's, you know, flying back from USA, the boss man to come and sort out the problems and everything. And I can't believe there's been such a fuss. And I'm pretty sure, I've texted him a couple of times in the interim, and I'm pretty sure he's just like everybody else thinking, what on earth is happening?
So why is it so interesting to people, do you think, Mark? What can you conclude? What does this story teach us?
I think it teaches us that we've all got a view and we've all got an opinion. And I think, look, we wouldn't have this, would we, if there's no Twitter and Instagram and all those kind of things. And what that's done is it's given everybody a voice, and quite rightly so. And as we know, I mean, generally it's come down on the side of Gary. And even though he's contracted in terms of, I think, with his company, he's still allowed to say what he wants. And the thing with the BBC is that they're frightened of their own shadow. That's the problem. And I think they've suddenly saw one, probably when it really broke out, and it was headlines on all the news networks, including your own newspapers. The Daily Mail stopped invading Poland for a couple of days, and they were all on it as well. And it's just like, wow, just this thing where he had the audacity to actually say what he was thinking. And he was quite right in saying what he was thinking, but maybe not just the line about, obviously, Germany in the 1930s.
Mark, do you think a lot of it's to do with the fact when people think Gary Lineker, they think the BBC. He's almost the embodiment of the BBC. He's been there 30 years. He's easily the highest paid member of the BBC. And he's probably one of the most famous people in Britain. Isn't that why this story's had such an impact?
Yeah, most definitely. And you're missing something. Don't forget the crisps, because millions of people have probably eaten the Walker's crisps at some particular thing. And listen, that's a really funny thing with him, because we go to games outside broadcast and we've been walking towards a game, whatever, and all the fans mill around and everything. And most of if you ask the kids kind of under 10 at that time, they say, do you know who this guy is? I mean, they didn't know who me and Hanson were, but they said, do you know who this guy is? And they go, yeah, he's the Walker's crisp bloke.
Yeah.
So it's all part and parcel of it, hasn't it?
Yeah. Mark, forgive me for not knowing the detail of this, but I don't know when you were last a pundit on Match of the Day and whether you had a Twitter account. But were you ever given clear guidance as to what you could and couldn't say online?
No. You were just left to get on it, and I think the idea was you were intelligent enough not to step over the line. I mean, I made one or two comments myself, but nothing like this. So no, there was never any guidance, but I think there was a massive trust, and you know, you just realise you work for the BBC. You're always very, very aware that you were sort of on call all the time with them.
Can I ask you just finally, Mark, we know that the Match of the Day audience rose by 500,000 on Saturday, which is rather amusing. I don't know if you watched it. How did you cope without any expert commentary? Was it rather fun?
I thought it was brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. I think they should sack the lot of them.
Quite right, too. Save the licensed pair a fortune.
Absolutely. The highest paid person at the BBC. Get rid of him.
Can we quote you on that?
Too late. We will.
Brilliant.
Mark, lovely to see you. Thanks so much, Mark Lawrenson there. He's aged really well. He looks good, doesn't he?
But, you know, the number of people who tell me they watched Match of the Day with the volume down because they can't stand all the prattling on and commentary.
Yeah.
So, in a moment, we're going to be talking to the Conservative MP, Brendan Clark-Smith, as we're talking about that Stop the Boats legislation. It's gone through the first stage in the House of Commons.
Will it work? We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512,
Virgin Media Channel 604, Freesat Channel 216,
Freeview Channel 236,
And YouView, channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prison.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed. So I guess they've always been quite woke. That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you. She's only teasing. Go on. He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, no, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
It's 11:23. You're with Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner here on GB News.
So Brendan Clark-Smith, MP for Bassetlaw, joins us now to discuss Rishi Sunak's talks with President Biden and this nuclear submarine deal. Good morning, Brendan. We can't start off this conversation, though, without talking about the debate in the House of Commons last night about the immigration bill. Your assessment, please.
Well, I'm really pleased with the bill. Obviously, it's something we've been calling for a long time with small boats. It's probably the biggest issue on the doorstep, has been for quite some time now. And it's about fairness more than anything. I think people are seeing large numbers of young men coming from what are effectively safe countries. We're having all the money we're spending on hotels, all the pressure it's putting on our public services and so on. And they want to see us redress the balance there. But of course, it's also the humane thing to do. We've had a lot of criticism over this, but really it's about stopping deaths in the channel and making sure really we crack the people smugglers and people who are genuine asylum seekers aren't caught up in the backlog because of it.
She's unrepentant, isn't she, the Home Secretary? She will not tone down her language, and she said she's not going to be put off her stride by basically irritating lefties.
Yeah, I mean, that's the incredible thing, Andrew. We were sat there in the chamber and people are talking about rhetoric and toning down language. And then I'm sat there in the Commons chamber and we're having people calling us far right and fascist and all sorts of things. And these are just very basic things our constituents are asking for. And if you look at the number of people we took into the country in 2022, we've had nearly 90,000 people coming from Ukraine. We've had 18,900 people coming from Afghanistan. We've had refugees from Syria, people from Hong Kong. We're a very, very welcome welcoming country. But we just cannot keep up with this situation. You know, there are probably 100 million displaced people in the world in various parts who want to move around, and you can't take everybody. You've got to have a fair system. You can't let people jump the queue. The system as it stands doesn't work. We hope that the opposition would at least agree with us with that. But again, they've tried to scupper it, the same as when we tried to deport foreign criminals. We have the same problem there with human rights lawyers and legal challenges, and really we just need a bit of common sense restoring.
It's absolutely critical that Rishi Sunak and the Conservatives get a handle on this situation before the next election if you've got any chance whatsoever of winning.
I agree, Bev. I've said exactly the same thing now. I'm in one of those red wall seats that came across to us in 2019. They placed a lot of trust in us there. And people have said, you know, our values are their values. They share those values, but they expect us to deliver. Now, with Rishi Sunak as Prime Minister, you know, he's listened, he's acting on what we're asking for, and he's trying to deliver on that now. So I think you're exactly right. I think we need to show that we're actually getting somewhere with this. Doesn't help that people are blocking us all the way, but on top of tackling the cost of living, certainly this, as much as a fairness and taking back control issue of anything, it's right up there on the top of people's priorities.
Now, he's in the United States, he's with Biden, he's met the Australian Prime Minister, he's done a big deal. Britain's going to have a big say in the construction of these nuclear-powered submarines, Brendan. That's going to be a lot of jobs for Britain, quite a lot of them up in the north of England, and also it's going to cement our relationship with Australia and the United States against China's growing influence.
Yeah, and this is fantastic, and it's something we've been working on for quite some time now. And of course, these are our allies. China don't like it. You know, we don't set our defence policy and so on based on what China wants. Obviously, in the world, we use our soft power a lot, but the United States and Australia, for many, many years, we've worked together. And as you said, this creates lots of jobs for us. We're very proud of our defence industry. We're going to have a lot of British contractors doing work there. And of course, it is also going to keep us safe. So I think this is a win-win. And of course, while we're over there, there's plenty of other things to discuss as well. So the Prime Minister's been invited back in June. We're very interested in trade with the United States, seeing what we can do there, and looking forward to us building on that relationship, really.
We're talking about this Gary Lineker thing. It's moved on to a general assessment of the role of the BBC in this country. We cannot have you here as a sitting MP to get your assessment of this. Lots of our viewers getting in touch saying that nobody is bigger than the BBC. Please defund the BBC. Defund the BBC. Defund the BBC. It's very popular, this idea, isn't it? That it's outdated and it's anachronistic and it probably has to go in its current form.
Yeah, I mean, I've spoken on this topic a few times in the past, Bev, and on the Gary Lineker one as well. And I'm not one of these who believes in cancel culture, and people are entitled to free speech. Of course, it does have consequences. I did think he overstepped the mark a bit with his comments. Again, he's entitled to have opinion, but when you're presenting a flagship show on an organisation like the BBC, which of course is taxpayer licence fee payer funded, they don't have a choice in that. I, for a long time, have believed in a subscription model. Now, Gary Lineker went to work for Sky or BT Sport or whatever and wants his opinion there, then that's perfectly fine. They're private companies, no issue with that at all. But I think when you're with the BBC, there's a added responsibility there. And as you say, there's a wider discussion at play there as to what the role of the BBC is. So if the BBC is going to have that impartial role, if it's going to have that unique role, then there's also a lot of responsibilities for people that go with that. And I think this has raised some really, really interesting questions. Certainly with freelancers, they're looking into reviewing their relationship with those as well. But I'd like us to have that wider discussion. And something Nadine Dorries touched on, it's a lot of money for people. A lot of people watch Netflix, they watch other services, they get their news from other sources such as GBNews, of course. And, people are ready for a bit of a change, I think. So let's have a discussion about the BBC, how it's funded. And then, of course, if people want to work for private organisations, they can say what they like then.
One more thing I've got to ask you. You're at Bassett Law, just down the road from Sheffield. You've got one of the few Olympic swimming pools in the country at Ponds Forge in Sheffield. In the meantime, 300 leisure centres, public swimming pools, are set to close after the pandemic and because of the heat cost bills. In the meantime, Rishi Sunak is changing the electricity supply to his own private house to heat his own swimming pool. How do you defend that?
I mean, I think if people are paying for things out of their own money, I suppose that's their own business. And I've never really had a problem if my neighbour buys a bigger car than me or has a bigger house than me or whatever. But if you look recently, we've put about £600 million into school sport and other things. We take sport really, really seriously. I take my little boy swimming. You can probably hear the bell for the commentary.
We can. That's the division bell. You've got to go and vote, Brendan. Go and vote.
Yeah, obviously, Sheffield, I do occasionally venture into South Yorkshire over the border. Being a proud Nottinghamshire, East Midlands lad, we do have some excellent local facilities. So it's about supporting that, getting energy bills down, helping with the cost of living and inflation, and it's all related, really. But we're certainly committed to sport and swimming. It's a great way of keeping fit as well.
It is.
Brendan Clark-Smith, thanks to Joyce. He's got to go and vote.
Yeah,
that
clearly.
division bell, there are certain pubs and restaurants in Westminster within a very close remit of the Houses of Parliament where the division bell goes. So if they're having their dinner, they've got 15 minutes to get and vote.
Oh,
so you're there, sat there with your dinner, the MP's cleared off. And they do warn you, it's a 3-line whip tonight, and sometimes the division bell goes 5 times during the dinner.
He did a very good job of swerving that Rishi Sunak question about the swimming pool, didn't he?
I think he might have been asked it before. It was a very good question, Bev, and you were right to answer it.
Now, in just a moment, Her Majesty the Queen Consort. They're very busy at the moment, aren't they? What do you call them? Gladys and...
Fred and Gladys.
Fred and Gladys. Well, they're visiting Elmhurst Ballet School, apparently, to celebrate the school's centenary with current students, staff and alumni. We're going to bring you the latest from that visit. First of all, your news headlines with Tamsin.
Bev, thanks very much. It's 11:31. Here are the headlines from the GB newsroom. The Chancellor is looking at increasing the lifetime pension allowance in an attempt to reverse the trend of early retirements. It's understood Jeremy Hunt is considering allowing individuals to put more money into their pension pot before being taxed. The current lifetime allowance stands at just over £1 million, with savers incurring tax after that personal pension pot threshold has been exceeded. The measures are expected to be unveiled at tomorrow's budget as the Chancellor looks to increase Britain's workforce to help stimulate the economy. The Prime Minister and US President have discussed increased assertiveness from China with an agreed approach to engage and maintain talks with the country. Rishi Sunak and Joe Biden met in San Diego alongside the Australian Prime Minister to announce a new submarine programme between the three countries. Mr Sunak outlined security steps in the UK, with the leaders discussing the importance of working together for global stability. Security Minister Tom Tugendhat told GB News it requires a multi-agency government effort to tackle the threat from China.
The AUKUS element, the defence element that the Prime Minister was in San Diego signing, is only one aspect of it, and there's much more about this to come. So this is a whole-of-government approach. It involves education, it involves the police, it involves so many different aspects of our intelligence services that this is a huge, I'm afraid, challenge. It's true, because there are some areas where we've got to engage. We've got to engage with our eyes wide open, and this is something I've always said. We mustn't be naive. There were certainly some people who may have been in recent decades.
Job vacancies in the UK have fallen for the 8th month in a row as firms hold off from recruiting due to economic pressures. The Office for National Statistics has found the rate of UK unemployment has remained unchanged at 3.7% in the 3 months to January. It said real pay continues to fall despite a drop in the inflation rate. TV, online, DAB Plus radio and on TuneIn. This is GB News. Now it's back to Bev and Andrew.
Well, still to come, Her Majesty the Queen Consort will visit Elmhurst Ballet School in Birmingham to celebrate their centenary.
Our man Cameron Walker's there. We're going to check in with him shortly. He's not going to be in his tutu. You're with To The Point on GB News.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
Welcome back to GB News. We have told you all morning that Eleanor Williams is due to be sentenced. We're going to go now live to the courtroom, we believe,
These messages
to
were
hear.
not genuinely from C or from anyone present that night. I am not sure that these messages were fabricated by the defendant. It remains, in my judgment, a possibility that these messages were created by ill-intentioned third parties. It follows that in relation to count 1, she will be sentenced on the basis that she is guilty under paragraph A, but not under paragraph B. As a result of this allegation, C was arrested and interviewed on the 27th of November 2017. He wasn't remanded into custody, but had the matter hanging over him until the March of 2018. The defendant had withdrawn her support for the prosecution in the January of 2018. In relation to counts 2, 3 and 4, the defendant made 3 separate allegations of rape against one Jordan Trengove, who is content to be named in these remarks. She went on a night out on the 8th of March 2019 into the 9th of March 2019 with Mr Trengove and others. She drank or took drugs such that she became intoxicated and had to be taken home. Over the next few days, she began to hear others talking on social media about what had happened on that night out. I'm perfectly satisfied that there was no basis for her believing that she had been sexually assaulted that night. However, she chose to assert that she'd been taken to an address by Mr Trengove, raped and then taken back into Barrow-in-Furness. In order to support that allegation, she created a number of false messages of which she took screenshots, purporting to be from Mr Trengove, in which he made supposed admissions in the most derogatory terms. She sent those messages to herself and then took screenshots of them so that they could be handed to the police. She made the first of a number of errors in that one of the accounts she used to send these messages was created from her family home using the IP address of the Wi-Fi network there. After creating these messages, she then, on the 6th of May 2019, called the police from her flat, alleging that she'd been attacked that day. At first, she feigned reluctance to give an account, but eventually made a false allegation about the 8th and the 9th of March 2019 and the 6th of May 2019. In relation to the 6th of May, she alleged that Mr Trengove had come to her flat. She had let him in and he wouldn't leave. She said she tried to push him out and they started to fight. He had a lock knife with which he threatened her. She said that he stripped her naked in the living room and pulled her into the bathroom by her hair.
How old is she?
She alleged that he then beat her with a shower head. She said that he raped her and didn't use a condom. At one point, when they were on the floor, he threatened to kill her and said he would enjoy raping her. She said she had bruises to her legs. She was indeed injured, but this account was a complete fabrication. Mr Trengove was not even there. She knew it was false. She did indeed have injuries, but she'd caused them to herself to support her allegation. And as we will see, this was to become a feature of her conduct. Mr Trengove was then arrested and interviewed about both incidents and was at that time bailed. Then on the 18th of May 2019, she again called the police, claiming that Mr Trengove had again come to her flat and violently raped her. She alleged that she'd come home from a night out. Mr Trengove arrived at her house and came in through the door, which was not locked as she was expecting a friend. She tried to push him out and they fought. She said that he struck her on her face and her body. As she was on the floor, she alleged that he raped her. He wore a condom. She phoned the police, who appear to have found her unconscious and naked on the floor. Again, she was injured. Again, these were self-inflicted. Again, this was a false allegation which she knew to be false. Again, Mr. Trengove was never even there. This time, Mr. Trengove was arrested but not bailed. He remained in custody until the 1st of August 2019. He was told that matters would not be pursued on the 20th of August 2019. In relation to counts 2, 3 and 4, which concern Mr. Trengove, I'm satisfied so that I am sure that the messages which she provided to the police, apparently from Mr. Trengove, were created by the defendant in order to support her false allegations. It follows that in respect of these counts, she will be sentenced on the basis of both paragraphs A and B. I will now summarise the evidence on count 5. On the 18th of June 2019, the defendant made allegation to Detective Inspector Nutter that she had been the victim of sex traffickers who had, since she was 12 or 13, sold her for sex at so-called sex parties. Her account mainly centred around a local businessman, Mohammed Ramzan, who is also content to be named in these remarks. She said that he had befriended her when she was 12 and shortly thereafter had sex with her, and then done so regularly. She said that Mr. Ramzan then persuaded her to have sex with another man. This turned into her being taken across the region to have sex with men. She described the abuse in some detail. She and other girls were abused. She claimed that the sexual acts would be filmed and those films sold. She spoke about individual acts of abuse, a girl who'd had a knife inserted into her vagina and was then forced to have sex before it was healed. She spoke of punishment beatings meted out to girls who didn't do as they were told. She said she'd been shown videos of a girl being anally and vaginally raped. She spoke of a girl nearly dying as a result of a beating. Another girl had been thrown down the stairs and then beaten. Another had had a dog set on her. That is the briefest of summaries. This was a detailed account of the most serious sort of sexual trafficking. This was, she said, first orchestrated by Mr. Ramzan, but then others became involved. It had been going on, she said, for years. She provided lists of girls who had been trafficked. None of them had been trafficked. She supplied a long list of men who were traffickers. They were not. She said she'd been taken to Amsterdam by Mr. Ramzan and forced to work in a brothel. She also said that on that same trip she had been sold by Mr. Ramzan for €25,000, but the buyer did not go through with the deal. She said that on another occasion an attempt had been made to take her to Pakistan. On another, that she had been housed in a caravan for 2 weeks in the United Kingdom. There she had been subdued by being forcibly injected with heroin so that a procession of men could have sex with her for money. She said that there were constant parties at which she and other young females were forced to attend, often given detailed instructions as to what to wear. She was made to take a young girl for an illegal abortion. All of this was complete fabrication. She created an extensive cast of traffickers, many with detailed biographers. Some were invented altogether, others existed but were not traffickers at all. She also made allegations about being taken for sexual exploitation to Ibiza for 2 weeks, where men paid Mr. Ramzan to have sex with her. This allegation was also shown to be false. Indeed, in police interview, when confronted with the possibility of travel records being checked, she admitted that this account was false, only to seek to replace it with another lie subsequently at trial. Detective Inspector Nutter was understandably troubled by what she heard. She spent a good deal of time with the defendant, believing that she was the victim of serious exploitation and that there was a highly dangerous ring of traffickers operating in the Barrow-in-Furness area. She arranged a meeting of regional police forces to begin a major multi-force investigation. She offered the defendant a safe house or even participation in a witness protection scheme. The Crown were able to prove, and I am sure, that the allegations were a complete fiction. Certain parts were readily disprovable. She had been to Amsterdam, but with her sister and her sister's partner. To save money, they had all three shared a hotel room at night and were in each other's company all day. At trial, the defendant tried to claim that the attempt to sell her by Mr. Ramzan happened on this trip, but her sister and her sister's partner gave evidence to the effect that she was never out of their sight. The females she named as co-victims of trafficking were spoken to. Many were profoundly upset by the suggestion. Some gave evidence at court, but many of the statements denying they'd ever been trafficked were agreed and read at trial. None of them had been trafficked. During the investigation, Mr. Ramzan was arrested. He had never really met the defendant, had nothing whatsoever to do with trafficking, had never been alone in a room with her, let alone had sex with her. He described in court his utter consternation at being publicly arrested on the promenade in Walney Island and questioned by the police. I'll set out more of the impact of this offending upon him and his family later in these remarks. The defendant set about seeking to back up her allegations against Mr. Ramzan and the fictitious traffickers. She did so in a number of ways. I will summarise here only some of them. She manipulated people with whom she was in contact via Snapchat to contact her. She would rename these people in her phone with the names of supposed traffickers. She would induce sexual messages from them and take a screenshot of those messages. Thus it would appear that she had a message with a sexual overtone from someone with the name of one of the supposed traffickers. When she was in the police station, she would elicit such messages to ensure that there was live evidence of the supposed traffickers pestering her. A number of these people came to court to give evidence. One young man from Essex had been rebadged by the defendant in her phone as Shaggy, the name of one of the supposed people traffickers from Barrow. He was in fact a young man from Essex who'd had little contact with the defendant. She'd told him she was from Portsmouth and cultivated a friendship with him to create messages she could later use. Another was a vague school acquaintance who wanted a relationship with her. He was renamed to Haram or Rami. She then took screenshots of these messages, falsely appearing to come from Haram or Rami, so that she could say they were evidence of her being trafficked. The defendant manipulated friends and work colleagues to involve them unwittingly in her deceptions. She invented people in her phone who simply didn't exist. She sometimes used two phones, one to send and one to receive messages from supposed traffickers or trafficked women. She would then take screenshots of those messages. There were other types of message she created. She would inflict unpleasant injuries on herself, which she later attributed to fictitious traffickers. She wrote letters to herself, supposedly from Rami. She made false diary entries. Based upon the evidence I have heard, I'm sure of all of the matters which I've set out above. It follows that in relation to count 5, she is to be sentenced on the basis of all of the particulars under paragraph A and paragraph B. I turn to count 6. Whilst the defendant had refused to participate in a witness protection programme, she did agree to be temporarily housed by the police in a hotel close to Kendal police station. The police arranged for her to have a job there. These events happened during the time frame of count 5. However, because the issue was completely different to the remainder of count 5, it was reflected in a separate count. It's convenient to deal with it at this stage. On the 30th of June 2019, the defendant left the hotel provided by the police and travelled to Blackpool by train. She'd already booked herself a hotel room there. The undisputed evidence was that she checked into her room and spent most of her time there. When she did go out, she was alone and on foot. She was seen on video to make a note of on her phone of the vehicle registration number of a car and the details of a takeaway restaurant. Having done so, she went to a shop, bought some food, sat in her hotel room and watched YouTube videos. The next day, she got up late and made her way to Preston. The police and her family were worried about her. She had ignored their messages. Eventually, police officers traced her to Preston and met her there. She was driven home to Barrow-in-Furness, and in the early hours of the morning, Detective Inspector Nutter came to meet her, worried as to what had happened. The defendant was later to tell the police in great detail that the traffickers had found her in Kendal and instructed her to go to Blackpool. There, she said, she was met by Mr. Ramzan and threatened with a violent death. She was made to visit 4 premises, and at each she was brutally raped by multiple men. The car whose registration number she had noted down was, she said, used to transport her between properties. A flat above the takeaway, whose details she had noted down, was for the venue for one of these attacks. Officers took her to Blackpool twice to try and identify the locations of these places. This account was all completely false. Eventually, confronted by incontrovertible evidence, she was forced to accept that none of this was true. She was later to claim at trial that she was forced to give this false account by the traffickers, but I ruled that duress was not available to her. Indeed, I am sure that no one pressured her to go to Blackpool at all. She did so entirely of her own volition in order to make up false allegations against Mr. Ramzan and others. I turn to count 7. On the 18th of July 2019, the defendant caught a train to Leeds. The clear evidence is that she spent a good part of the day in the park. She had 2 phones with her. She then travelled back to Preston, where she walked into the town centre. A young man walking home from a family party happened upon her. He asked her for a light, and they started to talk. They had a brief and entirely consensual sexual encounter. The defendant then caught the train to Barrow-in-Furness, exchanging details with the young man and tentatively agreeing to meet him at a later date. Once in Barrow-in-Furness, she walked to her flat. Her brother's girlfriend happened to see her as she walked her home, picked her up and took her home. Much of this, including much of what happened in Preston, was caught on closed-circuit television. By now it was the early hours of the 19th of July. Once her brother learned from his girlfriend that the defendant was at home, he called the police. Everyone had been frantically worried about her all day, and she had been ignoring their messages. When the police arrived at her house, the defendant pretended to be semi-conscious. The jury and I saw body-worn footage captured by the officers. It's clear that the defendant was play-acting, pretending to be semi-conscious. She was injured, but the clear evidence was that she had inflicted the injuries upon herself. She then created a false account of what had happened in Leeds, Preston and Barrow that day. All of this account was inconsistent with CCTV, telephone and other evidence. She told the police that on Wednesday the 17th of July, a man called Salza, an invented trafficker, came to her door. He'd slapped her in the face, pinned her to the wall by the neck. He told her to follow orders she would get on Snapchat. He said that she had lost them money and she needed to earn them £10,000 as a result. She said that she was then told to go to Leeds. There she was taken to a house where she had sex with 2 men. She and a girl called Molly then walked to another premises. There were other girls there. There she said she had sex with 3 men. She was then driven to a chicken shop in Headingley, where she had sex with another man. She then said she was driven to Bramley and then to Bradford, where she had sex with 3 men. She then saw her passport on the table with a ring on it and flight details to Bangladesh, so she ran. When the traffickers were able to contact her by phone, she was told to go to Preston. She said that the young man she had met in Preston was a trafficker and that he had sent her a message telling her that he had lined up some cocaine on a bench and she had no choice but to take it. She said that he took her to 2 Asian men who paid him to have sex with her. She then said that the young man himself then took her down a back alley and raped her. Eventually, she said, she was allowed to return to Barrow-in-Furness. Salza met her at the train station and he drove her home. We have seen the video footage of her walking home. She said that when she opened her door, he and another man forced their way in and she was forced to have sex with them both. Salza struck her in the face and told her to sort herself out and that they would be back for her at 2 a.m. 10 minutes later, the police arrived and she could not recall anything further until she woke in hospital. This was a complete fabrication. Much of it could be disproved from CCTV in Preston and Barrow-in-Furness. What happened in Leeds was shown to be false by the location of her phone. She had, during the course of the day, created other evidence to support the false account she knew she would give. Most notably, she had used one of the 2 phones she had with her that day to send messages from a person she described as Nicole to herself. She'd then taken screenshots of those messages. Nicole was supposed to be a fellow trafficked woman who was being raped at the parties. Nicole was supposedly angry at the defendant for leaving her and the other victims in Leeds. However, the agreed evidence was that when Nicole was apparently complaining about being left in Leeds by the defendant, the phone from which the messages were being sent was with the defendant on the train back to Preston. She was sending the Nicole messages from one phone in her possession to the other phone in her possession. I turn now to count 8. In May 2020, the defendant was on bail for perverting the course of justice. It's clear that she was still intent on trying to invent evidence to support her previous accounts. In the earlier part of 2020, the instances of her apparently going missing and turning up intoxicated and injured had increased. On the 18th of May 2020, she set out from home on foot. It's clear from the evidence that she never left Walney Island and never entered a vehicle. At 22:49, she was found by police in fields close to her home. She had multiple injuries. One eye was swollen shut. She had hammer injuries to her legs and abdomen, which were too numerous to count. Part of her little finger was partly severed. These injuries were all self-inflicted. Her account was that she had intended to catch a bus to travel to Barrow, but one of the males associated with those who'd exploited her offered her a lift, which she accepted. She then said that she was taken to a house in Barrow-in-Furness. There were 10 males there. She said that a number of named men raped her at that property. One of them assaulted her and tried to cut her finger off. One of them drove her back to Walney Island. She walked off to where the police found her. A few days later, the police found a hammer, which she had purchased some days before. It was hidden against a fence close to where the police had found her. It bore traces of her blood and DNA. A Home Office pathologist gave evidence to the effect that the serious injuries she had sustained were completely inconsistent with her account and completely consistent with being self-inflicted with the hammer which she had bought, which was found close to her and which bore her DNA. On the 20th of May 2019, the defendant made a Facebook post in which she posted shocking photographs of the injuries she had inflicted upon herself. These photographs were very graphic and bound to produce a significant response. In that post, she referred to these having been inflicted by 3, as she put it, Asian men, as they took her to various sex parties. In that same post, she referred to having been similarly abused by Asian men and men of Pakistani origin in various locations across the north of England for a number of years. She said that she would continue to tell the police everything she knew. She encouraged parents to be vigilant and children to speak out if they were concerned. She did not mention that she was already on bail for perverting the course of justice. I turn to count 9, to which the defendant pleaded guilty. This admission represents her writing a letter from custody to her sister, asking her sister to tell her, that is the defendant's solicitors, that a hammer had been found in her bedroom. This was an attempt to create a false defence to count 8. When she entered her plea, it was on the basis only of what she wrote to her sister and not what was said to her mother. In the context of this case, it is not necessary to decide that issue, and I will sentence her on her basis. The defendant is 22. She had no convictions prior to these matters coming before the court. I note that she was under 18 at the time of the commission of count 1. She had turned 18 by the time all other offences were committed,